Welcome to the October 11th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, I keep thinking we're going to take roll, but I will just start with a few announcements before we get to the formal agenda. Today is October 11th, and it is Debbie's first birthday as an Ossining resident. Yay! I'm sure you can think of no better way to spend it than when it's a lengthy work session agenda here at Village Hall. So we're looking forward to addressing a lot of fun items here in celebration of Debbie's birthday. But I have a few other announcements. One of them, which is a big one, if you are somebody who has a guest or a family member out of town and you need to park on the street for a night or two, I think it's up to 5 nights a year, there is a new number to call. If you call the number 914-941-PARK, which is 7275, so that's 941-PARK. 7275, then you can leave the information about your vehicle, where it's parked on the street, and that way you won't get a ticket. If you are parked on a street that has tag parking allowed on the night that you are parked there, even if you don't have a tag, you can get for a night or 2 or 5, which I did. I had family visiting this weekend and I took advantage of it, but the number wasn't in place yet. So I'm so excited the number is in place now, so that'll streamline that process. Thank you very much to the police department for updating that process. I also want to encourage folks to go to our website, villageofossining.org, and look for the icon that has some raised hands. If you are interested in serving on a board, commission, council, committee in the village, we have several vacancies and expired terms on almost every board. So take a look there's links there so you can learn about each of them, as well as the process for contacting J.B. Hoffman in the village manager's office and going on from there to learn more about the potential position and interview for it. And that is, we're going to turn our attention near the end of the meeting to boards and councils and committees, and it'll become that much more clear of how important it is to have folks applying to serve in those capacities. And then a few items to take out your calendar. If you are someone who likes to run, not me, but if you are someone who likes to run and you think you can run as far as 5 kilometers or walk and do your darndest to participate in the PBA 5K. You can sign up for that. If you're on Facebook, it's very easy. There's an event page. Otherwise, the Ossining PBA can direct you on how to register, but you can actually register the day of, and that day is this Saturday, the 14th. If you want to register, I think you have to be there at like 7:30 in the morning, and it's taking place at Cedar Lane Park. So you can reach out to the Ossining Police Department, and the easiest way is on social media if you're there. And also taking place this Saturday is the mobile shredder at the community center, and I don't have the time on me. Do you know what it is? 10 a.m.? 10 to 1 at the community center. So everybody can bring up to 4 file boxes worth of paper to be shredded. There may be a line, so be prepared when you arrive to wait until your boxes and papers are shredded. And then the last thing that I will mention is putting on my documentary and discussion series hat. Next Thursday, the 19th, at the Ossining Public Library. As always, it starts at 6:15. Parking is always a challenge when there's exciting events like this happening at the Ossining Library, so I encourage you to arrive a few minutes early. This month's film is called Swim Team, and it's about a swim team that was formed by parents of 3 kids who have autism. And it is quite an inspiring movie. We have 3 terrific panelists. I look forward to learning more about how to be supportive of folks with developmental disabilities in our community, as well as the challenges that these families have worked together to overcome. And I hope you will join us at the Ossining Public Library next Thursday, the 19th. Deputy Mayor Codman, do you have any announcements?
I do. This Saturday, after you've run 5K or shredded your documents or done other things of that nature, you can come kick off the Ossining Second Saturday Jazz program, which starts this month and then will run for 6 months every second Saturday at the Elks Lodge, live music. This Saturday is one of the original bands that kind of started the whole program off, Rhythm Rising. It's a Latin jazz band with a vibraphone. Wonderful music. Great location. The lodge is very welcoming. It's a really nice space. And we have a cash bar and some food, bar food by the lodge. So that's this Saturday, October 14th at 7:30 at the Elks Lodge, Rhythm Rising, Latin Jazz for Ossining Second Saturday Jazz. Thanks.
Not yet.
You're all good? All right. Then, Madam Manager, why don't you take over?
Thank you. We're going to start our evening with our village engineer, Paul Fraley. He's going to give us an update on the Broadway Bridge Rehabilitation Project. Paul?
Thank you, Manager McDonald. Happy birthday. Before I start my presentation, or rather before I turn over the presentation to Nikki Shute, who's here with us this evening from WSP USA, an engineering firm for which this division is located out of Briarcliff with a structural engineering specialty, I wanted to give a little chronological recap of how we got to where we got today for the benefit of the public and for those who might be hearing about this project for the first time. And then we're going to turn it over to Nikki to do an engineering and some of the research she's done to produce the product that she has. And then we'll come back to me a little bit to talk a little bit about schedule and finance for the aforementioned. So one of my personal favorite parts about the Kilbrook Trail, when that started to come to fruition and the trail was elevated and you were able to walk up the kill, if you will, and get a visual of the double arches, mostly only seen by most folks in Ossining on the crest of the town or the police department or the recreation department. That vision now can be seen by anybody that walks on the Kilbrook. And if you haven't done that yet, I encourage you to do so. The problem that we found, though, when we were constructing the Kilbrook Trail was that the lower arch, operated and owned by us, which is the Broadway Bridge, was in disrepair. And during this project, we found that it wasn't a minor repair. It was seriously structurally compromised. And Nikki's going to get into that a little bit. But it was on an inspection list for which the DOT inspects it every year and reports back to us. And we presently have what is known as a yellow flag condition on that bridge, where they notice a problem, it's worsening, and we need to deal with it before it becomes a red flag condition, at which point the DOT would come in and shut the road down, and we do not want that. So it's in a yellow flag stage right now. We satisfied the yellow flag by doing what Nikki's going to talk about tonight, and when we're done with this project, that flag will be removed and we'll be in a good place, and we'll have a nicer product at the end of the day. For the benefit of the public, we have the poster boards here, but just so the board knows and the public that's in the audience tonight, we're also going to show it on PowerPoint, so it'll be viewable as we rebroadcast. So again, this was really developed when we were doing the Kilbrook project, and we started developing it with the engineer on site, which is Kellard Sessions. He brought in WSP as a structural expert because we thought we were going to deal with it with some of the unexpended funds on that project. But once we realized the scale of this project, after some field investigation, we realized at that point that it needs to be a standalone capital project. So we sent the underexpended funds back to debt service and created a separate capital project to be funded in the 18 budget with some soft costs already funded this year for WSP and Kellard Sessions work. So at this point, again, I'd like to turn it over to Nikki Shute. She's going to talk about the project on PowerPoint, and then we'll come back to me to talk some schedule and finance. Nikki?
Oh, here we go. All right, so hi, hello again. My name's Nikki Shute, and I do work for WSP, the engineering firm for this project. about a year ago, I was here and I gave a presentation for the same project, and we discussed the project and some of the history and some of the structural issues it faced. And now we are nearing the end of the design phase and moving quickly to advertising and bidding the project. So we're here to update you on the progress. The primary goal really is twofold. First, a major rehabilitation. You know, it's going to include the brick repair of the underside, masonry, but also the overall strengthening of the existing arch. And I'll talk a little bit more detail on that in a few minutes. And secondly, to retain the visual aesthetic, you know, in the setting and preserve the original bridge elements. To do this, we did quite a bit of research on the existing bridge. It was built in 1861, but after the Croton Aqueduct was built. Much of the original construction is still in place today. We do know that the parapet and the fencing on the bridge were added much later, and there were some repairs done to the brick arch fascia in the 1990s, but otherwise the structure remains more or less intact since its original construction. The repairs included in this project, they're going to be made using reclaimed brick where possible and historic mortar that we determined through testing of the original mortar. So it will match much more closely in both composition and aesthetics. The parapet and fencing, like I said, is added much later. They are going to be removed in this project and replaced with DOT standard barriers. Aesthetic enhancements include brick veneer on both inside and outside of the barriers and a concrete coping atop. The chain link fence will be removed and replaced with steel picket black painted parapet fencing, and then lighting at four corners of the bridge. We also researched, you know, various rehabilitation schemes, anywhere from trying to just repair the deteriorated brick and repointing to complete demolition and reconstruction. Fortunately, there's a lot of repairs on these types of bridges that are done in the UK. They have a lot of old masonry arch bridges in their highway system and their rail system. So we were able to determine a suitable rehabilitation scheme that also kept the original architecture. In the top left corner is the photo of the existing structure before the safety netting was put on, and those other two photos are renderings of what the proposed bridge should look like with all the aesthetic features incorporated. We shared the design plans with SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, and although a review by their office isn't required due to the funding source, they agreed that the work that we proposed would have no adverse impact on historic resources. The one stipulation they added was that to put in a construction protection plan based on some National Park Service guidelines to protect the adjacent old Croton Aqueduct. Let's see your next slide. No. Okay. Next slide. There we go. So site plan showing the red, which is the bridge location, and the first order of work will be to repoint the underside of the arch, repoint the mortar, repair and replace the deteriorated brick. Not only will this restore the condition and look of the brick underside, it provides form work and support for the second item of work, which is the installation of a concrete saddle. That's the outlined in red on the elevation, or the longitudinal and the transverse section. It's a somewhat common rehabilitation practice for these types of arch bridges. It involves the placement of a new concrete arch or saddle over the top of the existing arch inside the arch spandrel walls. It's a major rehabilitation, but it will be nearly invisible from the outside. It not only strengthens the arch, but it adds a much needed waterproofing system. And most importantly, probably, that it eliminates the need to demolish and rebuild the structure to upgrade the structural capacity. Additional drainage inlets, we're going to upgrade the drainage system, especially at the west approach. New drainage structures at the low points and cleaning of the existing system will minimize future water collection inside the arch, which likely contributed pretty heavily to the deterioration that's out there today. Also, as part of this project, the areas in yellow are some improved pedestrian facilities. It'll be ADA compliant curb ramps, including the sites within the community center and the adjacent parking lots. Okay, this type of construction does not lend itself well to staged construction. So a full roadway closure and a detour are proposed. Local traffic, especially access to the community center and the aquatic centers, will be maintained. The pedestrian traffic will be detoured using the route in yellow, up the stairs through the parking lot, over the aqueduct, and back down the stairs at Ann Street. The vehicles be rerouted to the bridge, to the west, south and west, over the Brandreth Street Bridge. The schools have been, the bus company has been notified, and they're making plans to reroute their bus routes accordingly. The roadway closure and the construction work is expected to begin in early next spring, 2018, through the summer and ending before the start of school in fall of 2018. Beneath the bridge, Sing Sing Kill, the walkway will remain open for most of the construction duration, although temporary short-term closures might be enacted during major construction operations. Users will be protected from falling debris during construction through the installation of a sidewalk shed, scaffolding system. And the construction is phased to minimize risk to workers and the users below by only allowing repairs to be performed in localized areas and separate occurrences. In addition, the contractor has to implement a pretty significant monitoring program, and if any significant events are reported, pedestrian access will be limited until a more robust shoring system could be put in place. Schedule, as I said, we're nearing the design phase of the project and looking to have final contract documents complete to advertise by mid-November. As this contract has somewhat specialized construction, advertising will be a minimum of 6 weeks, and a site walkthrough will be scheduled during that time. Bid opening envisioned at the beginning of 2018, award shortly thereafter. After receiving notice to proceed, contractors should have some time to submit personnel qualifications, mock-ups of aesthetic treatments, and the demolition plans for review. The detour will be then put in place, and expect the contract to be in the ground sometime in March. 5 to 6 months later, the job should be complete and detour removed and bridge open to traffic end of August. So that's the project. Questions?
Thank you, Nikki. Before we open it up to questions, I just want to add a couple more points. I'm going to start with the schedule. The schedule, as Nikki mentioned, we tried to make the bulk of the shutdown in the summer to prevent a lot of the traffic, and particularly the school bus traffic interruption. In speaking with the school district, more specifically Mr. Minahan, who runs the bus operation out of the school district, he was okay with the detours. We talked about Aqueduct Street obviously not being an option there because of the arch on Aqueduct that prevents truck traffic. We're not concerned too much with any other heavy truck traffic having to have to divert, because we have those all posted now, right, with the 2.5 ton weight limit. So that's gonna shouldn't be too much of an issue. And as Nikki said, there'll still be complete access to the recreation facility, which is really what the school goes down there for the after school programs. So there should be limited interruption there. The pedestrian interruption, I think, is going to be more significant, but at the end of the day, what they're left with when we're done, I think, is going to be a much more pleasurable pedestrian experience. I want to talk a little bit about the budget. I'm going to see which slide I want to pull on here. So basically, when we first started talking about a year and a half ago about the scope of this project, we really didn't have a handle on the full structural requirement, whether we were going to have to do a complete saddle or we were going to do brick restoration. So we were kind of throwing rough estimates in the 1.2, 1.3 area for construction. But as you can see on the other slide that shows the yellow areas where we went and kind of stretched out a little bit and included some restoration work for the pedestrian experience to get you to and from the recreation facility and introduce you to the new Broadway Bridge. That obviously added to the project. And then when we finally got a handle on the structural requirements and the cost associated with maintaining, which I want to take this opportunity to thank Nikki for her attention here, because a lot of the historical components are maintained here in this project, and that was really her her goal, our wish, and she fulfilled it in these construction documents. But that comes with a price. So what you're going to see here is something very similar to what we have on some of the earlier documents, which we used to make some of the boards there. But this this detail over here in the bottom left is basically what the bridge looked like with the addition of some of the parapet enhancements in 1861, when this feature right here, the keystone on the original arch from the 1861 construction, is actually still there with the original engineer there. So we kind of want to pay homage there. And now you're going to have that aesthetic walking on the Kill as you come up the Kilbrook Trail, and that's what we were going for. This is our money shot right here, and this is where we're going to really get the full benefit of this restoration project. Some of the other little nuances here that we didn't really dive too deep into the weeds here, but you can see they have the time period lighting fixtures that mirror what we use in our downtown area, so we're trying to maintain that continuity there. This fencing, this parapet fencing along here mirrors the original time period fencing that you'll see on the Central Avenue Bridge / arch. So that's going to be nice. You're going to have this aesthetic on either end of your walk. And it's also a nice project to take on right now, being that New York City came in. New York City Parks came in and did a complete facade enhancement of their aqueduct arch, which is above ours. So I think when this project's all said and done, it's going to have it's going to bring this detail, this architectural detail, and this landmark, which is Ossining, back to where it deserves to be. So we're looking forward to your support here. So tying that support back into my finance conversation, we're probably we're already funded with the $200,000 in the project for the soft cost that's going on right now, and which will continue through construction in the form of construction management and engineering and shop drawing review and testing required for the project. But we are anticipating the actual construction bids to come in the high ones or low twos for this project. But still, I still think it's well worth it, and that number will only really be revealed when we have the bid opening. But I discussed this with finance already. We've made the amendments as recently as a couple hours ago to the capital plan that we originally went over with the manager's office a couple of days ago when we were discussing this project. But again, I think this is a very important project for the village to undertake, and its proximity to the downtown and our recreation facility is really going to create the attention now that we have the Kilbrook Trail there as well, back to where it should be. Thank you. Questions?
I want to keep this up for a minute, so I want to jump in before I'm sure that my fellow board members have other questions. But Nikki, you mentioned that you brought this to SHPO and got some of their feedback. I wasn't. This is not a landmarked bridge.
Eligible for listing on the National Register, but
Could you speak in the right mic? They can't hear you. Home.
Correct. It's not listed on the National Register. It is eligible based on uniqueness of type and its age.
Okay. Okay. What you said was that it wasn't required because of the source of funding.
Which SHPO doesn't get involved in reviews unless there is federal or state permits or funding in a project. Since this is 100% local funded, they don't typically get involved in the review process.
Okay, so since you mentioned funding and where the funding is coming from, and it's listed as a capital project for next year, we had thought that this might be a really good candidate for the bridge grant application this last year, and that didn't work out, and there was some talk maybe there'd be a grant opportunity again. Do we have any sense of if that's even on the horizon for us to consider?
I just spoke with Dave not that long ago about the same question. Thank you for bringing that up. We did apply for the Bridge New York program, which was an enhancement or an offshoot of the Pave New York, where the governor's office was making additional funds available for projects just like this. We applied but did not win in the award. It may come up again where they make it available. The program's still out there, so they have the venue for it. They just have to decide to fund it and announce that funding again, and at which point we will most definitely apply. And hopefully they do it in advance of construction commencement so we can
Would that be essential? That it
I don't
happens?
know. I don't know if it was the last time around, if you can actually commence with construction and still make a retroactive application, but whatever the case is, we will try to take advantage of it.
Then my other question was, could you go to the picture where we have the pedestrian enhancements listed? It's probably the next. No, yeah. I'm very excited about having a crosswalk on Broadway. Was there any consideration of doing it here?
No, the reason we put show the crosswalk here is because it's really the main access from the parking lot. Over here, you walk through some non-paved or concrete area to get to this island here. This was the sidewalk. This was a continuation of the sidewalk where it comes down the street here, or where you walk out of the public lot. Over here was really just put there to act as a landing point.
Okay.
If
I'll tell you.
Would it hurt?
Well, I walk from Main Street to the community center pretty regularly on the Aqueduct Trail, and I go down that staircase that has seen better days, and then I'm not even sure who owns that driveway, if we own that driveway or if and they have an easement, or if the private properties own it. Do you know for sure?
I believe this is not a paper road. It's actually paved, and it's a road that we maintain.
We own and maintain. Well, then.
But I will also tell you that the stairs on the top of this, I think, fall within the right of way of the aqueduct. I know they're dilapidated. It's been brought to our attention, and Recreation is aware of it, I believe now. And we also, for temporary repairs, and depending how the project goes, we included in the estimate some miscellaneous additional work as a line item for the contractor. And if that money is still available as we start to come closer to close out of this project, we may use that to either remove and just grade this area or actually reconstruct those stairs, depending on what this ends up looking like at the end of the day. I will investigate this, because what you're asking for is really not much of a change or really a significant
It wouldn't
impact.
be a cost differential.
Right.
I realize it's moving paint.
I mean, we were actually considering even taking this whole section out and just reestablishing grass and curb. We'll see what works best. We'll see what works best with how it's used right now. As long as how it's used right now is the safest option. That's the other component that we take into consideration. But as you can see, everything that's marked up in yellow here is basically taking everything that's either an ADA ramp doesn't exist, or a a dated ADA ramp or damaged ADA ramp is in there now. So we want to do it to today's standards, and that's why these are all located, are shown on the map here.
Oh yeah, I'm very excited about all this. I just know how I use this, and I don't walk. If I'm walking from Route 9, I'm walking on the north side of the sidewalks. I'm on the community center side anyway. I don't know if other people tend to use the south side on the Midas building side as pedestrians, but I do frequently. I mean, what I will do is I will just not use the crosswalk. I'll continue crossing where I cross now. So I'm just telling you, like, as a pedestrian, that's what I'll continue to do. So I know that's never the goal, but maybe other people use that more, and it's just not my pathway. So, Quanto, you cross the street the same way I do?
Yes, most people go down the steps and then into that someone's driveway or roadway that is owned by us, and then make their way to the community center. So,
So this would be the logical.
that would
where you
definitely,
cross.
exactly, absolutely.
Anyway, so just pointing that out as a pedestrian user, if there's a safe way to do that, that is more logical to me. It seems. But that's such a minor part of this project that I'm so excited about. I just wanted to call it to your attention while we've got the picture up there, and then I'll ask if my colleagues want to be able to reference the images while we ask questions.
No, I just have one question. Actually, since we were talking about the steps, I will let you know that I've used those steps for a very long time. That's actually part of. If those steps weren't there, then there really wouldn't be any way to connect from Main Street to the wreck. But in your presentation, you had mentioned something about capacity of the bridge, and you were, I guess, constructing in such a way where if we had added capacity, the bridge will be able to maintain capacity.
It's based on design truckloads, and
Okay.
this new concrete arch saddle is designed to a truckload that models today's truck traffic.
Okay.
It's unlikely, considering the age, that the existing arch was built to contain, to withstand such heavy trucks. It's not to say that it can't,
Mhm.
but unlikely it was designed as such. The new arch will be designed up to current, state and federal standards for truckloads.
Okay, I just wanted to understand what that meant. Thank you.
Mayor Codman?
So it sounds like you're building a bridge inside a bridge.
Correct.
And I guess the inside, or the new bridge that's going to be inside there, we will never see that.
Not unless you dig it up. No.
Well, I have no plans on that, but no, I think it's great that we're going to be you're able to do this and reinforce it, and as you say, get it up to proper capacity standards, and yet it'll still look like the beautiful old bridge it's been since 1861, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
One of the nice things that happened, because we were in there doing the Kilbrook project, and those were the fellas that said, hey, we really can't work here. The bricks are falling down, right? So that's why we put that net up. But with the net, we were allowed, and even before the net, the guys were taking the bricks, knowing that we were going to do a project like this, and we stockpiled them. So we're going to have very limited imported material. Most of this is going to be restoration of the 1861 material, which I think is really cool. And it's going to be with the research that Nikki's group did, as she said, with the mortar and what they do, where a lot of these are prevalent for the over in England, I think you said, or Europe, right? It's really going to be a nice, long-lasting detail that won't have the today's load on it because of the hidden true structural component of the brick. Of the arch.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so thank you. So the next time we will be in front of you is.
I think
No, I was
Trustee
going to say something
Quesada is
else,
about
but
to.
thank you.
Oh.
You just called me off. That's okay.
Sorry.
So now for that, no capital project. No, actually, I was excited when we actually started talking about this last year, and that was part of our capital project. So is we have to wait for the estimates, the construction part, to actually see how much that will be, and whatever that comes out, there could be additional features to enhance the surrounding areas. It seems to be. Now, we do have a weight limit on that street, sure.
There's a 2.5 ton weight limit on that street.
So the capacity of the bridge will exceed the capacity of the weight limit that we have here now. So that will never be an issue at all, because they're not supposed to be going through that street.
Correct, but you could have local traffic,
Correct.
which is allowed in like a moving
Okay.
van,
Yeah.
for example, in excess of the 2.5 tons.
And that we did that. You did that last year.
We just put the
That
signs
was-
up not that long ago, but the law
The law changed last year.
was started last year.
Okay. No, I'm in full support of
Earlier
this,
this
and
year.
I think the rest of the board seems to be. I mean, we were in support of last year, so I don't see that being a change. I'm just happy that this is going to go through. So thank you.
Thank you. So,
Please.
the next step will be, we'll have a resolution asking for authorization to advertise. Once we put the finishing touches on the document, they'll be reviewed by council, as they always are, before they go to the clerk's office for contractors to pick them up. And again, just to reiterate, it's a little different than what we usually come and present to you, is an extended advertise for bids, because this is such a specialized project. We don't want to rush the bid process. We're going to have a very at least one required field visit for the contractors, so they know what they're dealing with and know where they need to mobilize and what they're actually working on, so someone doesn't try to bid the project by just seeing it in a bid document without visiting the site. So we're going to have at least one of those, and we're going to give them a lot of time to look and do the research necessary in their bid, so we get appropriate prices in for all these specialized components. So that's why it's going so long.
Before we wrap this up, I want to say thank you to Nikki as well. And could we go back to that first picture that has the nice renderings of how lovely it's going to look? Yeah, I just, for folks who haven't been thinking about this project, or maybe you see the same bridge every day and you don't take note of what it actually looks like, all of that that brick facing detail, and that you talked about the fence and how that's reflective of the bridge above it, as well as what was there in the 1800s, and the lighting. That alone is such an incredible improvement to the beauty, the aesthetic appeal of this bridge, that I'm so excited about that. Never mind, the structurally sound and all of that is also very important. Thanks for taking care of that. But this is really, I'm very excited to celebrate this as a focal point, this iconic double arch bridge in our community next year. And I'll be looking to talk to our village historian to learn more about the whole history, which you touched on today. But I mean, I've heard stories about before the bridge that you're describing was there were like planks of wood that children would possibly fall through on their way to school. So there's a long history in this location, and I'm very, very excited for cutting the ribbon on this sometime next year, August 31st. It sounds like, right?
Thanks.
Got it in my calendar. All right. Thank you very much. Are there any other final questions before we say good evening to Paul and Nikki? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Is that it for the screen?
I'm sorry.
No.
I would like to leave the boards here in the manager's office. So if the public does come in and they're interested, or if you want to easel them out in the foyer, then you feel free. I'll just take them now, and I'll leave them leaning up against your door.
Thank
Thanks.
you very much. All right. So, do we want to put the screen up? This is usually what we do. Oh, we started with the sharp lighting. Overhead lighting. Great. Alrighty. So, Debbie.
All right, so
Thank you.
next up we have Tom Warren. He's our village treasurer. He's going to be talking to us about some of the fee schedules that the clerk has asked us to look at. One of the reasons that we're asking the board to consider where they want to be on just certain rates at this time is because there are printings, and the clerk has a process that she has to go through, and we have to advertise a little bit of the rates, whatever you've decided or you will decide, and we need to get that out before the end of the year. So waiting until November is really going to hamper her processing. And then on your desk you have a tax certiorari announcement, and I've asked Tom to just go over that quickly. It wasn't on the agenda. Oh, I thought they were all handed out. I'm sorry. There we go. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Okay. Good evening, Tom.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the Board of Trustees. As Debbie had mentioned, I'm here to speak on behalf of the village clerk so that she can work on some of her applications for the 2018 year. The first 2 pages were copies from the 2017 fee schedule that the clerk had specifically asked if I could address. The parking at the railroad station is something that we talk about annually. I'm going to leave that to last and move on to the other boxed item on the page, the amusement devices, which would be for jukebox or pool table, etc. The cabaret licenses. And on the next page, page 2 of the fee schedule, the refreshment business permit, as well as the dry cleaning and laundromat permits. I added some notes on these pages. You know, those last ones, besides the parking, there aren't a lot of actual permits that are issued. It's not a lot of money for the village, but just the same, when I was meeting with Debbie this afternoon, we didn't really have any comparables with other communities. So I think that the decision was made that we were going to suggest to the board that we pass on these for the time being, and maybe address them as part of looking at all the fees in the coming year. I also, off to the right, had noted like the amusement devices was still the same fee in 2017 as it was back in 2012. I'd only taken look-backs at 5 and 10 year periods to try to gauge a sense as to when the last time these fees may have been increased. The cabaret license, the current fee was in effect as of 2012, except for since that time we did add a half-year fee. And the refreshment business was still the same fee in 2012. And for the dry cleaning and laundromats, we did increase the fee schedule in 2017 to $30 per machine from the $20 in 2016. So that one might be set to go for another year anyway. But on the train station parking, there's a total of 660 permits that the clerk sells. We have currently the village resident permit for $425. The town of Ossining resident is $550. The non-resident is $1,050, and there's only about 9 or 10 of those. So really, we're really looking more at the rates for the village residents and the town residents. And on the third page, I had provided the parking survey that was done in August 2016. I did look at the closer parking lot rates, such as up at Cortland and Croton, and looking downriver at Sleepy Hollow, Briarcliff, and Terrytown. And I also sorted these by low to high, although sometimes in places like Greenwich, that was a double liner, so their base residential rate was the one that I had focused on when I was trying to sort these. But overall, as you can see, we're sort of in the low end, competitive with the other rates in the local communities. And the other page that was provided, page, oh boy, I think it was page 4. was different options. So we'd actually had looked at this, actually look at this every year, and we had developed a trend where the train station parking rates were changed every 3 years now. So 2017 is the third year of the same rates that were first increased in 2015. And the past couple of times, the increases were, along the range of about 5 and 6%. So what I did was extend the 5 and 6% options to 2018 as possibilities. So the $425 village resident permit would be $450 as a $25 increase. The $25 increase also for the town resident rate, and the non-resident rate would be a $50 increase to keep the same percentage, 5%. I also doubled that as an option, and of course the option is to leave the 2017 rate in effect for 2018. So that was sort of the consensus that we were looking at for tonight, to see if the board was ready to agree with any train station rates for the 2018 year, so that the clerk could get ready to mail out the applications to the current users, as well as those that are on the waiting list.
Does anybody want to comment? This seems, I'd forgotten that we had, this is, what the simplest thing to do would be to go along with the, okay, it's been 3 years. We've been going up by $20 or $25 each year. So taking it from $425 where it's been in 2017, 16, and 15 to $450 for the village resident and $575 for the town. It had been at $550 and $1,100 for non-residents, but you said there's only a handful of people that are actually non-Ossining residents. It seems like we already had that conversation, and I'm comfortable with continuing with that mindset, which had been pretty well researched, and I like where we fall on this list of comparables with other municipalities. We're not the greatest deal in town, but we're not far off. So if people really wanted to push to jump $50, that would be a long conversation that I'm not really eager to have. Unless people felt really strongly, and there's something I'm not considering.
This is for train station parking.
Train
Correct.
station parking.
I'm fine with train station parking.
Trustee Quesada? Trustee Coven?
Thank you, Tom. I'm good too.
So we're suggesting that we make the increase the first
Yeah, the 5 or 6% there.
450, 575, and 1,100. That's what we're referring to.
To me, that's continuing the pattern that we've had in recent years, which I think we have had lengthy discussions about in previous meetings. Did you want to consider going way up to, adding 50?
I don't, as somebody who used to be a commuter, I could wait another year. I could leave them all the same.
Well, I mean, if we're continuing with this pattern, then it's like we're setting this for 18, 19, 20. I mean, the board next year could say, forget it, we're going to double everything. We're going to double it every year. I mean, we can always do that. But if we're continuing with this pattern, then we would be sticking with 450 for the next 3 years, and then it would become 475 in 2021. Not that it has to, but that's been the pattern that the board has established in recent years. Does that seem reasonable to you? I mean,
It does.
okay.
Community parking is fine. That's not where my druthers are.
Okay. I obviously you've considered, and maybe it's written down here, what the although I'm not seeing it, what that would mean as far as revenue change overall.
Yes, actually, the budget in 2017 is $305,000.
Revenue anticipated.
306,605. No, I'm sorry, it was 305,000. And we have met our revenues for the year, but at 5 to 6% will be about another $15,000 to $18,000 added revenue in the budget in 2018.
And you already have been looking at your numbers, Debbie. So is the 5% increase what you had been thinking, or were you thinking that the board would be more bullish and we'd go up to the 12%?
Oh, no, actually, Mayor, I thought that continuing the pattern is a really great strategy for right now. And I also wanted to mention that we will be proposing a parking analysis in lieu of economic development that will also give us a strategic plan for how we price out our parking areas. And so if you continue the pattern now and we get an analysis that shows that there's a supply and demand, there are other options for parking, at that time then you can decide if you want to make your parking strategy and the pricing of your parking different based on where we want to drive those cars, if you will.
Okay.
So it makes good sense to me. So.
All right. So I'm not hearing any dissent. So we're comfortable with the 5 and 6% increases for next year.
And we'll discuss the rest of these fees during budget time. Correct.
We're going to discuss the entire fee schedule at budget time.
Okay.
We had discussed specifically what happens if we take no action on the other ones that Marianne had requested. That means that, she can wait a certain amount of time. Like if we want to come back and discuss this in 2 weeks, if we get comparable rates, there would still be time for her to update her documents and send them out for the 2018 year. Otherwise, we would leave the fees as is for 2018. And as I said, it wasn't a lot of money because there aren't a lot of cabaret licenses, not a lot of laundromats.
So if for the sake of her getting all her paperwork, if we wanted to discuss daytime parking, we should have that conversation in the next 2 weeks?
No, actually, daytime parking is the conversation that we can have, during November, because, they just start implementing the new rate at whatever time the board decides that new rate is going to take effect.
Okay. And what I'm not seeing reflected here, I know we had some conversations about cabaret license.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm looking at
that's not
Stuart.
actually reflected at this.
right. We did in fact pass a resolution.
Yeah.
So the cabaret license fee is now tiered.
Okay.
It's not reflected in
Right.
this
And
fee
so
schedule.
that has to get, that's
was
tiered
updated.
between, depending on in fact what is served. So that would have to be reflected here. And I guess just for my purpose, if the board's sense is to go up by the, I guess the 5, and 6, 5, and 5%, Tom, would it be easier if there's a resolution for next week? So because that way it's official and we can.
Yes, we normally do change the fees by adoption of a board resolution.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Only because he said, because Marianne, if she needs to get these out.
Right.
I want to have it out with the correct figures
Yes.
based on a correct resolution.
We should vote and make it official before she sends out letters saying what the amount is. Yes.
I'm sorry.
So when I look at this list of the potential changes that Marianne had requested, the train station parking we just took care of. The cabaret licenses have actually been recently reviewed, and they're just not reflected here. The amusement device, which, as you indicated, isn't a whole lot of folks that it would impact, but it hasn't been updated in at least 6 years, maybe a decade, and that's the same thing with the refreshment license and the dry cleaning and laundromats, right? Because you've got all these numbers here. Oh wait, no, the coin opera, the dry cleaning
right.
did increase, but the others have been stagnant for a decade. Am I reading this right?
Correct. And I think oh,
except for the refreshment went up in 2012.
Well, it was at $60 in 2012. I don't.
Oh, but sometime between 07 and 12 it changed from 35 to 60.
It certainly hasn't kept with the pace of inflation, and that has reduced the value of the permit if the fees don't change over time.
I don't want to go into depth on deciding what it should be this year. I just wanted to say, if we're going to look into comparables, we did say last year that every year we want to be, identifying a few more to bring up to date. And if it's been 3, 5, 10 years, then they really should be brought up incrementally so that people who have to pay these licenses aren't, hit with a really big increase, but at the same time, we can't just ignore them for a decade. So I'd be interested to know about those other ones that are left here, which is particularly the laundromats, the refreshments, and the amusements.
Okay, so we'll find out when the refreshment license or permit was last increased. We'll also ask the clerk's office to get us comparables, and we can bring these back in 2 weeks to discuss that. That'll still give her enough time to get those applications out.
Oh, those are calendar applications as well.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Everybody, does that make sense to everyone?
Thank you, Tom.
Thank
Yes.
Okay, and on the other item was that tax certiorari claim. We were actually caught off a little off guard on this. As you know, the village relies on the town to be the assessor and to set the assessments, and they also defend any tax certiorari claims and negotiate settlements. And we had recently received this one for 6668 Croton Avenue. It was actually a 9-year settled tax certiorari claim, which is kind of unusual that it goes that long. But the good news was that 4 of the 9 years were settled with no increase in the assessment. And the odd thing about this tax certiorari claim was that when it was signed, it included the provision that the village and the town and the school and the county have to pay the property owner within 30 days, which is very unusual. Most of our tax certiorari claims give us 60 days, so we have time to calculate it and process it and bring it to the board. But all of a sudden, when we saw that this was just a 30-day window to make the claim, we had to bring it to you immediately. And the reason why that's important is that if we don't make the payment within that statutory period, then we have to pay interest going back to when the tax was first paid, in this case going back to 2009. So that would add significantly to the cost of the tax certiorari refund, which, by the way, we had calculated at $30,484.75, of which only $4,918 pertains to the current year. The other $25,000 is already accrued on the books because we had actually issued a serial bond in 2015. That was the last time that we issued a serial bond, and we still have some money left on that to absorb this tax certiorari claim. And even after payment of this claim, we still have another $47,000 remaining on that bond. It's actually been a very good year for tax certiorari claims. This is only the second one that we brought to the board this year.
It's not typical that they're able to go back 9 years, right?
They haven't. They're usually very limited. And I only know of one other one that we had a couple of years ago down on South Highland. That was actually like at least 9 years as well.
What would often happen is if you don't bring it within a certain period of time, or put it on the court's trial calendar, the case in fact becomes stale and is subject to dismissal. The 9-year period is long. Usually you see maybe 4 or 5, so it's not entirely clear. I did write to Ben Levitt when I was told about the 30 days, because he is obviously the individual who handles these for the town, and he thought that the reason that it may have been 30 rather than 60 days is because, in fact, it was over a 9-year period. But it's unclear. I mean, the judgment itself, I think, Tom, was signed in September, and it was approved by the county in September. So we got it really shortly after it was done. But it is unusual to have a tax certiorari proceeding that effectively goes almost 10 years. I mean, that's just, I'm not familiar with something that takes that long.
Individuals aren't able to do this.
Well, I mean, you could file a tax.
I couldn't file a SCARS that goes back 9 years, could I? Because
Well,
I've
no,
been
but
the
they didn't
village
go
owes-
back 9 years. They literally file petitions every single year.
Oh, they have been filing.
Oh,
And
yes.
this was just now. This was just.
They're settled
Oh, okay.
now.
All right, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why it took so long, but that's the court's issue. All right, thank you. Then I understand. I mean, and we don't really have a choice. We're gonna have to vote on this next week. So,
Right.
thank you for explaining. Claire.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next item on our agenda is the proposed zoning text amendment for 11 Hudson Street. I'll turn this over to Stuart Kahan.
Good evening, everyone. So much to talk about.
Yeah, you do. You've got 1, 2, 3. The next half a dozen items, sir.
Tell you. This, if we want to call it text amendment, is different than the next application, which relates to 145 North Highland. So I just want to put this particular one in context and just a little historical background. The applicant owns approximately 0.66 acres on Hudson Street, which is already has a one-family house at that location. What he had proposed to the planning board was to construct a two-family home on the same parcel. The property is located in the PRD district, and there are, I believe, 4 PRD districts within the village of Ossining. What happened is after there was it went to the planning board declared itself lead agency. And thank you, Mayor, I appreciate that. Okay, and this property is at Hudson Street, so it's just near the prison. And what occurred here was that there were a number of variances that were required in order to make to do this work. And the Zoning Board of Appeals was faced with the following situation. Under the code for the PRD district, it requires property that is a minimum of 3 acres, not divided by a street. Clearly, in the case of this applicant, we don't have that. If you look at the other PRD districts, particularly in the north part of the village, you're dealing with Mystic Point and everything up near, where St. Augustine's would be, at the very north part there, which is the law. There's also a PRD district. There are 2 there, and there's one at the very south end of the village as well. So what occurred here was that the Zoning Board of Appeals said to the applicant effectively, we really can't do anything because we are limited by the 3-acre minimum that is set forth in the code. The planning board then issued for all intents and purposes, a resolution indicating that they concurred with the ZBA's position and essentially said to the Board of Trustees, what do you want to do? Do you want to change the 3-acre minimum that exists at that, for the PRD districts? Do you want to allow a density analysis whereby currently I believe it's, and I know Lynn is here, I think it's 6 units per acre that are allowed in the PRD district. So what the proposal by the applicant effectively would have been to allow, based on the size of his parcel, a number of units that he could construct. And I should point out, not multifamily, because a multifamily residence is not permitted in the PRD district. What's allowed is 1-family, 2-family, could be 2-family attached, could be 2-family detached. So the planning board essentially kicked this back to the Board of Trustees, not with a proposed text amendment, but with basically saying, what would you like to, what do you think, what do you as Board of Trustees want to do here? Do you want to change the zone? Do you want to change the 3-acre requirement? Do you want to propose a density analysis? which would allow this individual to construct the two-family home that he wants at that location. I should point out in that particular PRD zone, which has the former test well site as part of it, most of those locations clearly, in fact, I don't think there are any of the locations in there meet the 3-acre zone. They simply don't. But this was made part of the PRD zone when it was rezoned back in 2009, following the comprehensive plan and the amendment to the zoning statute. So really what's up for, I think discussion before this board tonight is not as much a text amendment, because I don't have a text amendment to actually present to you. It's not something, there's been no, short form, environmental assessment form file that hasn't had a secret review, but it's more as to the sense of the board as to what, what they would want. I know that we've talked about zoning changes, and I know we have obviously our housing analysis, but this is a circumstance here where the property as is, is in a zone, but of course does not have the property required to do anything within that zone. As I said, there is already a one-family house there. The person is proposing a two-family, and both zoning and planning have essentially put their actions on hold. Planning has put it on hold because they need to see if the variances will be granted, and zoning is not doing anything because their view is we can't grant a variance. So that's where this is right now as to this particular parcel.
Before folks have questions, I just want to clarify. There's an existing one family,
Correct.
and he would like to create an additional two family on this lot, or get rid of or change
No.
the one family into a two.
He wants, and Lynn can come up and help us out
Please,
here, but the plans are an additional two-family.
So maintain the existing one, add an additional two within this 2/3 of an acre.
Right.
Yes.
And while we're talking about it, I see there's like a cluster or a chunk of 4 or 5 lots that are in the PRD zone on Hudson Street that are adjacent to the S50 zone, which is single family half-acre lots. Is that what that is?
It's
It's
like
50?
5,000.
Okay.
5,000 square feet.
So even if his property were located in the adjacent zone, he wouldn't be allowed to do this because you can't build a two-family in the adjacent zone. Whether that's how it should be or not is a bigger question for us to ask as we're reviewing the zoning.
Right. You are correct. Your analysis is correct.
Master. Okay, do folks have questions?
I
on this?
don't really have a question, just more of a comment. We've had this conversation several times as a board. I think we really need to have the comprehensive plan in our 2018 budget. We're constantly going to have issues of zoning coming back to us, and clearly this is an example where you have a PRD district with existing. When you look at the existing areas, there are homes there. I don't know what the thought process of actually having this particular place at PRD, but it's something that we need to address. To be quite frank, I would rather do a comprehensive look at the comprehensive plan than to start doing piecemeal here, piecemeal there. It just seems like we need to, if they're asking, what are you going to do, BOT? I would say we should open up the comprehensive plan. We have a housing needs assessment that recommends we do open up the comprehensive plan. The DWRC made some alluded to us looking at the comprehensive plan and zoning. I think it's time that we actually do that and actually put the money there, because when I'm thinking about the property and thinking about Hudson Street, me personally, I don't have an issue with the guy putting a two-family house on his existing lot, but we should have the zoning. He should be allowed to do it, and we shouldn't have to keep making decisions about this property owner, this property owner, this property owner. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with Trustee Bazemore that we seem to have a number of these issues where the current zoning is deficient in relationship to either what's being asked or what would seem to be something reasonable to do. We've done text amendments before, but those text amendments have been more around expanded uses of existing zones. That, you know, you can't even build, right now, the way the zoning code sits, you can't even, as of right, you can't build a structure in some zones in the village. And this is I think, a reasonable example of that. You know, I mean, how can we permit this to happen when in the zone next door, nobody can do that as of right? You know, we need to start to look at the comprehensive plan, and we need to open this thing up and make that happen. Because otherwise, people are just going to keep coming back to us. We're going to have to. We're going to be basically we're going to be doing spot zoning. We're going to have to come back and look at every single situation until we get a holistic solution to the broader land use issues that we have in the village. So.
Quesada.
Thank you. You know what is interesting? This is something that I've been having an opposition for the past couple months in regards to how we deal with situations like this. And I see some of my colleagues have come my way in a way, I guess, to look at this whole thing as a holistic plan and not just as a one zone. And it's funny, John, you said the spot zoning. I've been using that word for a couple months now in different applications that have come in front of us. So definitely, I think is as a village board of trustees, I think we should definitely look into not just one zone, not just one area, not just as a particular developer or a resident that comes in with some issues. I think we should address those issues as an overall layer for the whole village of Austin, because there are areas that comprehensive plan, when it took place in 2009, there's some items that definitely makes no sense now, I guess, in the part of the use. Stuart, you mentioned a property right next door that this particular person owns, which is a lab, which is commercial, and I remember he went through a lot of hoops just to get it back to where it was sometime last year. So because it was in a different zone, which it was just something that it was interesting to see, because before it was something totally different. So as we go forward as a board, as this board, I think we definitely have to look into the map and start looking into actually the needs and what actually has happened and what will happen in the next 10 years from now, not just the next 2 years, not the next 3 or 4 years. We have to look at it in the next 10 years and what we would like to see the village of Austin to be, not just what they want to see as developers, but what as a residents we want to see for the next 10 years. And then at that point it will be the different board. 10 years from now, I'll be dealing with something different at that point. So I'm good with actually what it was said, and yeah, let's start talking about how do we rationalize, develop, and compose this whole zoning map again to make it right.
So, Stuart, oh yes, please, Lynn.
I just want to append something that council said. Just so the zoning board recognized that there's some idiosyncrasies to the text of the code for this district and to the bulk requirements for the code for this district. So like the 3-acre requirement is listed in the text, but it's not in the bulk requirement. So that was some of the conflict also that surrounded them with making a determination of whether they could even grant a variance, and where they went back and said to the planning board, you know, this needs to move up to a higher level. We need to have the conversation of the zoning, the map changes, and if we want to make those changes.
Thank you. Well, we've certainly had an awful lot of conversations recently. Things have been sent back to us by the land use boards, particularly the zoning board, with questions like this, as well as everything that Trustee Basemore was reflecting, which is that our zoning regulations are dependent on our comprehensive plan, and we've talked a lot about how to review the comprehensive plan from a number of perspectives. And we have done some text amendments in recent years that have been really very positive and have made a lot of sense. And it becomes a question to us of when is it a bridge too far? And in this case, I'm not even sure what the text amendment would possibly be. It's really just granting a variance to let somebody do something that's not at all in the code. or even in an adjacent zone.
Which is why the ZBA, rather than denying a variance, essentially said, the example is that if it was simply a bulk requirement, Lynn, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if it was just like a bulk requirement where in terms of you have to have 40,000 square feet and you only have, let's say, 18,000, you could sort of do a percentage and figure out how many units you can put in. But for this particular zone, it explicitly says has to be 3 acres. So they really didn't have the wiggle room to do that sort of density. So that's where this came in, and they found themselves, and as did the planning board. So that's why ultimately it came back here. But as I pointed out at the beginning, it's not really a text amendment because there's no text here. It's just more questions from the ZBA and the planning board.
Right. And the applicant themselves, their proposal prorated what they would be allowed had they had 3 acres. So they sized down their presentation.
Right. I mean, because if just using, and I guess this is what you were trying to help me understand, but when just using the 6 units per acre ratio that's allowed in the PRD, if they have 2/3 of an acre, then that would be like 4 units, and they're only looking to do 3 units. So that's, I assume, the
Right.
premise of his argument, that he's
Yes.
consistent with that element of it.
Yes, that was, yes.
And that would be the
math
pathway if
exactly.
we wanted to grant it, but I'm hearing from my colleagues that they're not inclined to do that because we really want to look at this more comprehensively, and I guess that would lead me to ask, is there a strong, compelling reason for the greater good of the community why this should be considered? And I'm not hearing that, but maybe I just didn't read I'm not familiar with the whole proposal.
No, this is, I mean, I think you've heard where it is, and this was what the proposal that was made. The applicant was aware of, just so you know, that this was on tonight and is not here with regard to this. But this obviously creates questions not only for this portion of the PRD, but as pointed out, there are 4 PRD zones in the village, and in terms of that particular 3-acre requirement. And I think it's a matter of, the board can certainly opine that it's a matter that has to be looked at on a broader basis rather than just with regard to this one zone and this one application.
So yes.
No, I was just going to say the memo from the planning board is, and really the ZBA is a signal to us that if they can't act, within the confines of the code, then that's telling us that the code's deficient and it needs to be addressed and it needs to be dealt with. And I'm not willing to do that on an individual basis, on an individual zone basis. I think it has to be done comprehensively and looked at, from a larger perspective, because there's multiple zones of the same type. I mean, we could do a comprehensive plan, and we could change the zone types. We could do any. I mean, I was involved in this process. Okay, I was involved in the comprehensive plan, and the longer I sit in this chair, the more deficiencies I see and the problems that come up, because what we thought we did in 2009 was what we thought was right then, but now here we are, 8 years later, and it's not working, and so we're going to have to do something about that.
So I guess my next question is, I can ask this after we're done with this particular situation, but what is the next steps about actually looking at the comprehensive plan? Like, what does that look like?
Oh man,
Because you've been asking us
that's
since
bigger than a bread box,
2013.
man. Come on, man. That's,
Well, I saw Debbie writing something down when you said that. That's
Right.
something we wanted to include in the 2018 budget to be able to do a real thorough analysis of it.
Right, and so the next step would be to fund the project in the 2018. Then we would go out for proposals and select a firm. My experience with doing a really good job with a comprehensive plan is it takes over a year to get everything exactly the way you want it. It takes a lot of hearings and public input and things like that about what you might want to change or not change, or some of the details. And like Lynn explained, there's conflict just in the applications. We want to make sure those are out of there. My question for the board is, we have a couple of projects, because the next one will be a very similar conversation with all of you, in the grander scheme of wanting to get this done, and we definitely do. Do you want to look at individual projects to see if they're not really that off from what you...
That to me be a no. on my
I,
end.
I don't
Alright.
think we
Mine
should
is-
arbitrarily say no with a
Right.
blanket statement. I think we should, and that's, we've talked
Individually.
about that. Some of them, sometimes there's a tweak that makes sense that's not so out of the realm of being consistent with what we have. But I don't want to, don't be so hard on yourself, and I don't want to overstate the changes, the
No,
tweaks to the
I-
comprehensive plan.
well-
Because the DRWC, when people read that, and that was, 15 of the members there are community members that have really never spent any time looking at it. And overall, it's a really strong document that has a lot of valuable information. And most of that does not need to be redone. There are updates and there are tweaks and there are things now that we've lived with it and built and developed with it for 8 years that we realize this is where we are in our community today. These are the areas where we keep having things come up. This is how we can modify it to better achieve our goals for today. And that's what we need to do.
Right.
We spent, I can't tell you how much money and how much time creating that comprehensive plan. We are not throwing that out. We are improving it.
Well,
We're
I'm not-
reviewing
I'm-
it and improving
Well,
it and modifying it.
again, as much as a comprehensive plan or a list of strategies, right? Like, yes, in concept it's nice, but I do think that as I've started to look at other municipalities and their comprehensive plans and some of their, and it's changed, the layout has changed. I think we can be a little more comprehensive because regardless of what we say or think about the current comprehensive plan, we keep having these.
Absolutely.
So
So that's why we're reviewing it, but we're not going to sit down and do the same whole thing that you have read the comprehensive
I
plan.
have.
Does that entire thing need to be rewritten in your estimation?
No, not the whole thing, but there's definitely certain things that
You want to modify the zoning. You want to update the zoning.
I can't modify the zoning unless the comprehensive.
Exactly.
Unless it's a reflection of the comprehensive.
Correct.
That's the problem when you do one.
Yes. All right.
Well, and I'll just finish by saying that, any comprehensive plan needs to be supported by the code changes because there's the vision and then there's the hammer. There's the thing that actually says, here's our vision, and then here's the code that says how the vision gets
Yes.
executed. And that's the reason I agreed to do the comprehensive plan, because in concert with doing the plan itself, we totally rewrote the code. There were so many problems with the code. It was insane. And listen, I guess I just acknowledge the fact that, listen, there's a lot of great things in the comprehensive plan. I wasn't being hard on myself as much as I was acknowledging the fact that things change and circumstances change. And we haven't, I think we spent 4 years to get it done, and that's a lot, and it creates institutional exhaustion. And then once it's done, then it kind of goes, and then, if you don't, I wish we'd picked this up a few years ago, but there wasn't the institutional desire to do that because there are other things that needed to be done. So I think we're in a good place now to move forward to revisit it. So
4 years versus 1 year. I like what you said, 1 year. So I think it's a little different.
well, it hadn't been done for 50 years, so we got a shorter time frame to work with here. So it's the right ratio.
Okay. So I think clearly there's not the support for any zoning text amendment, which hasn't even been proposed because the pathway would be kind of
Yes,
murky so
yes,
at
I
this time.
understand.
So
Gotcha.
it'll be one of the things that's considered in
Okay.
the larger view. Sir?
We'll report that back to the two other land use boards, so that'll be fine.
Yep.
Thank you. Next up, you have another proposed zoning text amendment.
Yes.
And I see that
This-
some of the folks from that property are here with us.
Right. This is on, and let me just, if I can, Debbie, if you could help pass this just to everybody. This is on 145 North Highland, the Cardinal McCluskey application. Counsel for both the owner of the property and the Cardinal McCluskey School are here. This text amendment went to the planning board, and the planning board reviewed it and came back with their recommendations. They were pretty much in line with the proposed amendment by the applicant. The planning board had three specific provisions they thought should be added and which have in fact been included in the proposed amendment. And their requests from the planning board were that the educational uses with residential components within T-zones be classified as conditional permitted uses, and have a gross area of not less than 1 acre undivided by an existing street, that there be minimum parking requirements equal or at least equal or if not greater than those for senior living facilities, and that there be appropriate buffers to screen the facility from surrounding residences. Again, just as a reminder, what the applicant proposes is to have a residential educational facility. They already have one at 155 North Highland. They're proposing to do this at 145 North Highland. And I know they were before this board. They were before the planning board on numerous occasions. As noted in one of their proposed amendments, the school would have, this relates to school having no more than 25 students. And otherwise, as I indicated, the planning board reviewed the proposed amendment in line specifically with the village code and came to the opinion that it was a legitimate request, an appropriate request for an amendment with those three additions or suggestions. And those three suggestions, I'm pleased to say, have been accepted by the applicant and appear within their proposed zoning text amendment, which is now here before the board. Just so the board knows process, there would then have to be a resolution to notice a public hearing. I believe under our code it's got to be 15 days notice in terms of the public hearing. One of the things that I'll discuss with Lynn is actually who gets notified, because this is not a map change, so who gets notified is a little bit different than otherwise. But it's would then be a public hearing, and after the public hearing is closed, the board could then vote on this text amendment. Again, this relates to a T-zone. We have multiple T-zones in the village, but it does include relate to the residential school that already exists at 155. Just to put it at 145 North Highland.
This draft is the product of the planning board?
This draft is the product of the applicant with the planning board's recommendations based upon their resolution. So it has some information that was before in their earlier drafts, but also based upon what the planning board asked for in the resolution that was signed by the chair on September the 26th.
And this change in the code would also apply to the other T-zones?
All T-zones, correct. It would be throughout T-zones, yes. And one of the things that the applicant did present to the planning board, Trustee Codman, were other facilities or other locations within T-zones where, in fact, you'd have the same type of situation, where you'd have where you would have the size of the facility might well allow for a residential educational facility for the number of students. Again, what the planning board was concerned about was buffer. They wanted to have a buffer area. They were concerned about parking, so that has been included in here. And in terms of the gross area, not less than 1 acre undivided by an existing street, which would be applicable here as well.
And it would be a conditional use?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I would want to understand. I guess I would want to have a deeper understanding of the other zones that are affected and understand the current use of those zones, or the current land use in the other zones.
What I'll be happy to do is provide you, prior to any public hearing, with the submissions by the applicant in which that was dealt with, because he went into various locations. There was some along Spring Street and other areas that are T-zones where, in fact, that exists. So I'll be happy to have that all submitted in advance of any public hearing, so that it's certainly made aware, and that'll be brought out at the public hearing as well, so that information can be presented to the board.
Yeah, I think I've always found one of the most compelling reasons to consider this and to see this as a minor enough adjustment that it's reasonable to consider as a text amendment is that T-zones already allow for residential use for senior facilities, and T-zones already allow for schools. What they don't allow for is residential schools that confer a degree, which if there's already residential styles of facilities that could exist, they likely already do, or they could anyway, and they could have seniors living in, which would have a similar impact on the neighborhood without us making any change. So if this didn't become a school and some senior living facility wanted to move in and use this property and build residential units for senior living, they could without us making any changes. But the person who wants to buy it wants to use it for a use that's not currently allowed. Those similar uses exist.
Exactly correct.
Go ahead.
I said it before. I think that to me, and that's something that you and I are gonna disagree. I think is gonna be affected as a T-zone itself. So my suggestion still is if we're gonna do something like we talked about an application prior to this, let's do it all at once. But the rest of the board is here, so they can make a decision. My take right now is we have to wait.
Actually, Rika's trustee
Oh, yeah.
Levin's not able to be here, so I don't remember where her mindset is at on this, and I don't know where it would be today.
Let me just make this one point. Once the recommendation comes back from the planning board, you have the public hearing. So at that point, the public hearing is held, and then the board can vote on the text amendments.
And that's what this is.
That's what.
That's
So we're having a public hearing anyway.
Yes, you
Oh,
must have.
alright.
Yeah, you
So we don't have to make, there's no decision.
This
We're
is
just
just-
having another
this is
conversation.
This is just to let you know the work
Alright.
session, so that there'll be a resolution presented for the scheduling of the public hearing. That's
Okay.
I got a voted
Alright.
last time. That's why we went to the planning board.
just wanted to.
That's what my take is. Yes.
That's just to let you know.
Oh. All right. So then there will be a resolution on next week saying that we're calling for a public hearing so that we can discuss this again, and anybody from the public can discuss it.
That would be
Now,
good.
Excellent. Thank you.
quick question, Lynn, if you don't mind. So when this application went in front of the planning board, they usually do a 100-foot radius
300.
notifications for the neighbors.
300.
300. Thank you. Was any neighbors, any concerns that the neighborhoods had? Did anyone show up? Was there any mailing that they sent out?
I don't
Was
think
any
there
of
were
that stuff
any-
at all?
I
No,
don't-
it came on as a referral from the Board of Trustees, so it didn't actually get a notice. It just got advertised on the agenda because it's not required to be noticed. It wasn't an actual application to the planning
I
board.
believe that was something that we, at least, when I could be wrong, I can go back to the tape, but that's something that we wanted to do. We wanted to notify the neighbors. So I guess if we are going to have a public meeting next week, that's an opportunity that we
All we're
should
doing
have.
for next week is
Yeah.
calling for it, so it'll be
Yeah.
2 weeks after that.
2
so
weeks
we have
after
time
that,
to
so we have time to
We can-
notify, again, the neighbors that will be surrounding this particular property.
Mhm.
It's essential for
We
them
can
to
make a
know.
point.
Well, I think the question is though,
we can make a point
it's
of
not
doing it.
spot zoning, so it really should be everybody
No,
lives
no,
in
no, no,
T-zones.
No, correct. And again, for them to send
I
out,
think, yeah, I was going
pretty
to
much
say
every-
anybody in a T-zone
everybody in a
should get
T-zone.
a.
That's
Yeah.
a much
No,
bigger.
You're
That,
right.
I
Thank you.
apologize. That's something I was going to discuss with Lynn with the board,
Yeah.
because, we could clearly pull the names of everyone in the T-zone.
Correct.
because
Yeah,
it doesn't
absolutely.
take every T-zone. So they can be notified,
Yeah.
in addition to calling for the public
Exactly.
hearing, that they have to be notified that this is on, and it'll be on a date. Won't be 2 weeks, because you have to give a minimum of 15 days notice under our code. So it'll have to be not the legislative session, it'll have to be sometime in November. Just the way I look at that. Just pointing it
Oh,
out.
stop! We're just calling for a public hearing.
The whole T-zone.
I got a
It
vote
does
last
affect-
time, like I said.
Yeah, so that's fine. We can certainly pull those names.
Yeah, we've done text amendments before.
Yeah.
We've done text amendments to the entire waterfront. But I guess we'll see how different. So then it'll probably be on the 15th. That will be the public hearing because
I'll
15 days would
I
be,
think that was.
which is a Thursday. Okay. Um,
We will provide exact information as to other parcels in the T-zone.
please do at that time. Okay, you know what? We have some exciting stuff to come on the Stuart Kahan show. Can we take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and talk about noise ordinances and our appointed boards and committees. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you. I feel like this is Downton Abbey and we are on episode 14, season 12.
I like that episode.
Yes, that was a good one. What I've handed out to everyone is is a draft of proposed local law 8, which relates to changes to the noise ordinance. Specifically, if the board will recall, we had discussions both with regard to generators and with regard to gasoline-powered leaf blowers. So what I've done with this proposed local law is to change portions of Chapter 178, which is the village's noise ordinance, to include those particular uses, those specific uses here. Start out with new definitions of what is identified as a permanent emergency generator and a gasoline-powered leaf blower. This was taken in part from other municipalities, a couple in Westchester and some, I believe, on Long Island that have these ordinances. But a couple of things, and the reason we're having this work session is to discuss a few things here. With regard to gas-powered leaf blowers, what you find is that generally there are restrictions in terms of is both time restrictions and actual periods when you cannot use them at all. And what I have in a proposal here, and it's at the bottom of page 2, is that in the village of Ossining, the use of a gas-powered leaf blower is prohibited from June 1st through and including September 30th of each year. Other municipalities use just about the same dates. Some go from the middle of May until October 1st, but that's sort of the window that they have, and generally don't allow it. Some allow it during that period, but don't allow it during weekends. It varies, but I, for purposes of discussion, put that period in from June 1 through September 30, and that then goes on that during the months when the gas-powered leaf blowers may be used, the noise levels that are already set forth in the statute must be complied with, and that comes above, which is basically, during daytime hours, there really is no time restriction for domestic tools and equipment, but during evening hours, it cannot exceed 45 decibels within a residential zoning district. But I also have included something that is what I thought was very good is in the Tarrytown rule, which is that folks who own or rent 1, 2, or 3 family homes and who are personally using the gas-powered leaf blower at their residence are exempted from the provisions. So if you're cleaning your own house, someone can't essentially call up and get the noise police after you.
Question, Stuart.
Yes.
Would the person, for that exemption, would you still be allowed to use the leaf blower from June 1st to October or September 30th?
Yes, the way that it's worded, and I took this from the Tarrytown, Trustee Bazemore, is effectively yes, that if you're a homeowner and you're wanting to simply clean your lawn, you would be permitted to do it within your own property, even if it's between June 1 to September 30.
Okay, so I think this is the initial intent of the person, because someone did bring this to our attention about the leaf blower, that if homeowners are allowed to use the leaf blower from June 1st to October or to September, then there's really no need for the restriction. I think the idea was that people were using leaf blowers, the idea was to just really restrict leaf blowers.
Right.
I think that was the intent of the person's request, to allow single-family, multifamily, or 3-family homeowners to be able to use the leaf blower. I don't even know why we're restricting it.
I think it was gas.
The gas. That's what we're talking about. So
No, no, no. We're not talking about gas.
Okay.
We're not talking about because I think that request was,
Just
the
for
use
gas.
of gas.
Okay.
Leaf blowers. That was like.
We've gotten requests for various.
Okay.
I had a lengthy conversation with a gentleman. I thought he was going to send me some material, but I don't think he ever did, about the incredible detrimental health impacts that leaf blowers have on the people who are using them, the people
Yeah.
in the neighborhood. I mean, there's lots of reasons why people have objections to leaf blowers and would like us to limit their use, not just quality of life.
Yeah.
So, and I understand that, Trustee Bays. I put it in here, but that can obviously, that can obviously come out. That's why I wanted to just put it in. I liked what Tarrytown had because I thought that if I'm a homeowner and I wanted to essentially use the leaf blower to clean my lawn for some reason, I didn't want to basically, be under this. But I do understand that, if it's only going to be used by homeowners effectively, are you sort of putting a,
Yeah,
I'm driving a truck through the exception to
Yeah,
your.
yeah. Like I'm talking about, particularly, I'm talking about the gas stuff. I mean,
Gotcha.
So if
I understand.
if we need, I would rather modify the gas in general.
Yeah, because
into-
this is only directed to gas-powered leaf blowers. There are a few municipalities that actually talk about just leaf blowers without differentiating between gas or electric. But, given that I think the way the folks, at least the information I was getting, were concerned with the gas-powered leaf blowers, that's why I put that. And there are many ordinances that in fact specifically deal with gas-powered. Yes, sir.
Yeah, since we're rewriting this thing, I'm looking at, I guess there's section D,
Okay.
item number 2.
The noise levels?
Yeah, well, the noise levels, but I'm more interested in changing the time.
Okay.
I'd like to move it to 10 a.m. I mean, I'd say noon, but that would just piss people off, because I think,
On weekends,
yeah,
Saturday, Sundays, and holidays,
yeah.
9 a.m. is insufficient for you?
Well, it's too early.
Too early.
That's just wrong.
I have
9 a.m.
seen-
having a leaf blower go off in my neighborhood? Hell no.
I have
Oh,
seen.
I'm sorry.
I have seen noon in some places, some 10 a.m. But
Sorry, I
again,
just think it's disgusting.
That's a-
It's bad enough we have to allow these people to use these things, I mean, we can't keep them from doing that. But at least on the weekends and on holidays, we can, push the time, I mean, you got 5 days of the week. You start at 8 a.m. and we're talking about the summertime, and you're going all the way to sunset. I mean, there's a lot of hours in the day. There's a lot of light hours. So I'm not feeling bad, okay, about asking for 10 or even 11 o'clock. And I would,
well,
So let me just make sure I understand this from domestic tools and equipment, from vehicle repair. Like, I had landscapers come to my property, and at 8:50 on a Saturday, they started doing work, and I said, no, you have to wait 10 minutes because I'm the mayor and you can't break it by 10 minutes. And they're like, okay, lady. So what I would be saying then essentially is to the landscapers, okay, that's 1 hour less of work that you get to get done on Saturday.
I can do it later in the day.
Well,
Put
I mean,
it-
no, it's.
Bake it in somewhere else.
Sundown
Hey, I'm
doesn't,
sorry,
sundown doesn't change, though.
It is what it is. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm trying to understand what the impact is, though.
Oh, we're talking about quality of life.
Okay.
And having periods of time during the summer, specifically in the morning, where I don't have to listen to, one of these leaf blowers.
well, just to comment, bless you, just to keep in mind, that, bless you again, that subsection 2 under D, actually, that refers to all types of equipment. In other words, if they were using a lawnmower, they
Doesn't
couldn't-
matter.
No, I'm just, so it's not,
Oh,
We
okay.
need to make sure we understand what we're talking
it's
about.
not just for
okay.
gas
All right.
powered, so that section, so.
It says blowers are similar devices, and that would include the laundry
Bless you
list
again.
of, chainsaws,
Right.
anything else that's
Got
a
that.
single cycle engine
But that's
that's
so,
polluting the planet when they're
whatever,
running.
yeah, obviously what this board thinks, but,
So, since Aline is here, I'm gonna ask her. So, help me out on this one. A building permit, you're allowed to work on Saturdays, sure? What time is the restriction on Saturdays? Do you remember?
I believe I believe you're able to work on Saturdays, and I thought it was like nine.
Okay, so is that what we're saying, John?
Yeah.
they're not allowed to start construction at 9 o'clock. They have to start at 10 o'clock.
I'm sorry, that's. We're talking about residential, that's different.
Yeah, but the
tools,
domestic
not same.
tools.
That's
Yeah,
not the same
domestic
as
tools and
construction.
equipment. But if I'm doing renovations on my deck,
I
if
can
I'm
answer.
doing that,
Yeah.
so
No,
what
No,
is
but if
that
you have a
mean?
building permit,
We'll
it's
give you the
different.
answer.
Because that's in, there's another section of 178 that actually deals with that. Okay. Here, no, Saturdays except, construction activities 9 AM to 5 PM on weekends.
But that's a different
7:30,
section, right?
7:30
But
to
I-
8 PM
But the noise,
during the
the
week.
noise levels and
But-
the
but I- but I-
tools. Go ahead, Sam. Go ahead, John.
No, what I would say is that the activities of leaf blowers, lawnmowers, and other things are much more repetitive, okay, than a construction activity. That's not something that happens on a weekly basis.
Not in the
or-
same location forever.
Yes. So I think we can distinguish that.
So,
But I wouldn't
okay with
object
9
to,
o'clock.
I wouldn't object to moving it, the construction till 10 too on the weekends and holidays.
You're okay with 9 o'clock? That was
No,
very
I mean,
smooth,
now that
Manny.
we've opened that door, we can.
so Stuart, back to, I just want to make sure, like, I don't know where the rest of the board feels about this, but I would, like to, I don't want there to be a restriction of 1 and 2, 3 family homeowners.
Okay.
When it comes to gas-powered leaf blowers.
What is that? What are you saying?
So this is section, this is
Talking
page
about
2,
that's,
number
page
4.
2. So you just want the whole section out? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that if we're gonna restrict gas leaf blowers from June 1st to September
Basically,
30th,
summer, yeah.
the summer, we should do it for everyone.
Understood.
Why would anybody want to use a leaf blower in July?
Gas powered, again, this is particularly for gas powered.
Gas powers, leaf blowers.
Oh,
So they get it, because they don't use a bag on their blowers.
okay. Leaving the grass clippings on your grass is actually environmentally wise.
No, it's from the sidewalks and stuff, so it moves it off the fence, so that it's environmentally safe.
Not having grass on the sidewalk, but, okay.
Well, in some areas we do.
So currently what this says is that landscapers can't do it, but that a private homeowner could.
Yep.
So you're saying if a landscaper can't do it, Victoria Gary can't do it either?
Basically.
Okay, I'm fine. I don't have any. All right,
Do you have an issue with that?
okay. All right,
Okay.
there you go.
Need 3.
Got what you wanted.
Listen,
Okay.
I got some other things on the list.
Well,
It's definitely.
I don't know if we have consensus on the 10 a.m. Saturday thing. I don't think
Like I
Trustee
said,
Quezada
I'm
was
good
like,
with
you know.
9 o'clock, so
9, all right.
Well, I'm not good with 9.
Okay, he's not good with 9. I can't.
No, I'm,
No, I want at least 10 o'clock on Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays, 10
Maybe
o'clock.
we should do a Facebook poll.
Ooh,
Seriously. And see what people
I
think.
don't think anybody would object to that. One more hour of peace and quiet, thank you. Bring
we're
it
just
on.
giving people the choice between 9 a.m.
and
or
10.
10 a.m.
Noon.
When can people?
So you said noon too, sure?
Oh, no.
Well,
No, I don't think there's enough consensus to
Yeah.
even
said
consider that.
I said that I thought that's what I personally would like, but I think that's unreasonable. But I think asking for an extra hour in the morning,
Have you, but I've never done a poll before, so
They're
someone would have
simple.
to train me to
Yes,
do that.
it's intuitive.
do a survey monkey or something, right?
I'll do it with you. It's intuitive. So what we're asking the public is, if we were to restrict leaf blower usage on Saturday mornings
And Sunday and holidays.
and Sundays and holiday, well, can they?
What about the landscapers, are they going to be able to vote on this? If,
They have access to
We
Facebook.
have access to Facebook.
so then they have no say.
I don't know. I'm not.
Correct.
This
That
is
was part of-
unscientific. This is
Well, I mean,
not-
somebody in Hawaii could vote on a Facebook poll.
This is not going to be helpful.
It's not a scientific way to gauge the input of the community.
Well, listen, I'm not going to keep people from doing what they want to do, but yeah, you can take all the polls you want. It's not going to change the way I feel about it. I've lived here for 30 years, and I've been tired of hearing.
9 or 10 for you.
I feel like maybe because I get woken up early enough that 9 a.m. is not that big a deal. So, but I'm a parent of young children. Maybe when
Well,
I have
yeah, of
teenagers, I
course.
won't feel that way. I got soccer games, baseball games.
let Rika
All
weigh
right,
in.
we're not voting on anything right now. So right
No,
now, the
all I
board
would
is
do
is undecided on 9 or
Open it
10
up for
a.m.
a-
Okay.
a public hearing
we
at
can,
some
what
point.
we
Well, it's
can
gonna
do
go
is
for a
next
public, it
week-
has to go to, it's gonna have a
wait.
public hearing
So
anyway.
next week, on the continuing business, we can bring that up again. Rika will be
Yes.
there, and then we'll go
Okay,
from there.
fine, we'll
That's
talk
fine.
about it then.
Excellent.
All right.
That works.
But we haven't even gotten through this whole
I have more.
proposed
Oh,
there's
noise
more than
ordinance.
this, yeah.
Yes, there's so much more.
So you
It's
might
like the
go to
last
the-
3
to the public
pages.
hearing.
The
are-
last part of it is not really
No, all the
anything.
underlined stuff is all new.
Yes, so, but it's all seems reasonable.
Well,
to
I've
me.
got, okay, so then we talk about permanent emergency generators. Just one thing with regard to the gas-powered and leaf blowers, which is, sort of follows what we just, the brush, weeds, and grass amendments that you'll be voting on next week. It will require, in terms of, they basically can't blow it onto someone else's property, they can't blow it onto a public right-of-way, all things like that. So that's there. Then it goes into the emergency generators. They obviously have to be installed consistent with federal, state, county, and local ordinances. I put in here that they could not exceed 80 decibels because the equipment that has been proposed for the particular development here was at 75. I have been told by the engineer there that the type of generators that would be used on these type of facilities can't be below basically 75. So, and one of the things I know we discussed last time is that we've not made any zoning changes here, meaning that a lot of these things that deal with generators you see in other municipalities' zoning codes in terms of that a permit is required, that it's got to have a certain amount of sound barriers and things like that. That's something that can be, looked at another time. It's also included here that the operation of the permanent emergency generator for maintenance and testing shall not exceed 45 minutes in any 7-day period. The ones that I've seen that have those time restrictions, it's either 30 or 45 days, and it's basically over a 1-week period. What I was told by the individual, the engineer that I spoke with, is that it really depends on the use of the particular equipment. This equipment would be used, obviously, at an apartment complex. Her estimation is that it probably would not even have to be used weekly. It might have to be used maybe twice a month. But, that's in there, and that's subject to discussion. I did include here a provision which is paragraph 8, which actually comes from the village of Muncie Park out on Long Island, which and this relates both to portable as well as permanent generators, that they can be operated in an emergency situation regardless of the noise circumstance. If someone needs to pump water out of their home, if there's a medical situation, if there's no power, and then at the end of the emergency, then basically they have to go back and do what they have to do. So that's in there. So because we didn't really have that sort of emergency provision there. So that's with regard to the noise ordinance. Again, we can discuss it during continuing business next week, but that's sort of the outline of what the proposal is here.
My only question is, I was looking for some noise dampening language, because I know that is included in some. Is that something we're not able to include in a noise ordinance, and it would have to be part of a zoning regulation?
Where I've seen it, it is seen in zoning regulations, that first of all, one that we may want to include in a zoning regulation, that it requires a permit, in terms of where it's required, and that the, as part of that permit process, there has to be dampening and things like that. Rather than put that here, it would be, I think, more appropriate in the zoning code, because it really deals with, a particular structure and how that structure is going to be constructed and employed with regard to the location.
Well, that goes back to setbacks and things of that nature.
Correct. And that could all come in there. Because currently, we don't have anything in the zoning code that relates to generators. We do deal with air conditioner units, but not with generators.
Well, I really appreciate that we're looking at potentially improving quality of life by putting some limitations on leaf blowers, because currently they just operate as they operate, as well as looking at expanding the ability for folks to use generators or noisy equipment in the event of an emergency. It's something that thankfully hasn't come up. We've never had somebody get in trouble for keeping their medical equipment going in an emergency, but it's appropriate that we acknowledge it here. So thank you for looking at this from more than one perspective. So the next step for this?
Well, rather than call for the public hearing next week, there may want to be further discussion during continuing business, and then we can call for the public hearing, do a resolution for that 2 weeks after that, which would put us.
I guess it's not
November 1st.
it's not time sensitive, so that's fine. Thank you.
That's there.
Yeah, we could deliberate on this all winter.
Yeah, that's just what we want to do, is just keep dragging things out. Okay.
Okay. Well,
We can leave it 9 o'clock
We've
as
got a
is.
year-long analysis of our comprehensive plan to get
There
underway.
we go.
So.
Now you're into it.
No, I'm
glad-
into it. Can you
I'm
hear
glad-
how into it I am?
I'm glad you finally came around.
It's only taken, what, 5 years of you talking to me about this
Jesus
one?
Christ.
Woo! So,
with that, we're
last
going to
two
turn
items.
to term limits. Always, always something that brings a religious flavor to our meetings. I have not
All people.
I have not provided the board with an actual proposed local law. And the reason is that, based upon my discussions with the board and my review, if there's a consideration of term limits, it may well be that if it's to be done on a global basis for all boards and commissions, my thought would be to include perhaps a new chapter in the code simply called boards and commissions, which would list that there are term limits for certain things. There are training requirements for certain of our boards. The mechanics of doing it, rather than for example, right now we have a section for our EAC, we have a section for our planning board, a section for the ZBA. We could obviously amend each one of those to put in, if there is a term limit put in, or alternatively, what some other locales have is a section just called boards and commissions, and that all boards and commissions are subject to term limits. This is what the term limit is, and how long they have to be off the board before they can reapply. That's more technical in terms of where we want to put it, rather than the actual nuts and bolts of term limits, which is the real substance of the conversation here. I sent a memo around to the board previously about different, term limit requirements in a number of jurisdictions.
What was the date of that email, Stuart?
That was October the 6th, 11:46 a.m. Just people are looking.
October 6th, you say?
And what I came across is that in the jurisdictions that have term limits, you see it primarily with your land use boards, and that meaning primarily planning and zoning, a few with regard to historic. And those boards generally are placed on a term limit of 2 terms, which in most cases would be a total of 10 years. And if the board member wants to reapply to be on that particular board, they would have to sit out. And the sit-out period varies anywhere from 1 year to the entire full term, be it another 5 years. But one of the things that I referenced is that the village of Tuxedo Park has sort of a workaround on that, which is that the Board of Trustees, if unable to appoint a new member to a board because of lack of interest or for any other reason, despite its best efforts to do so, may by resolution either waive the 10-year limit and reappoint a current member, or waive the requirement for what is in Tuxedo Park, a 2-year hiatus between terms, and appoint a former member whose term ended less than 2 years prior. So they essentially, as I said, give themselves a workaround or a means if that comes up. So when looking at term limits, there's one in terms of how many terms do you want to limit that particular individual to. And once that individual has finished serving those complete terms, how long does that person have to sit out before being eligible for that board again to reapply? That does not mean the person could not obviously apply for another board. They could in the interim, but that's just basically a consideration in terms of how that would be done. And and the thought here was to apply a term limit, through all the different boards and commissions. But one of the things I think is important for the board to consider is that we have different terms for the different boards. Planning, zoning, and HPC, and planning/Board of Architectural Review, same people. That's a 5-year term. Our Board of Ethics and I believe Recreation Advisory are 3-year terms. And everything else, I believe, is 2 years. Although I did not actually find downtown development. I think I have to look in the agreement with the Harbor Square folks to see the term, but everything else is 2 years. So one of the thoughts may be that if it's a 2-year term, you may want to give a longer period in
More than
terms
2
of
terms.
more than 2 terms, maybe 2 or maybe 3 or perhaps 4. With a 3-year term, you may want to give 2 or 3, and with your 5 years, you may just want to give 2 terms, being 10 years. The 5-year terms, those 3 boards are manager appointees. Your Board of Ethics is village board appointees. The Code Board of Appeals is also a manager appointee, and that is a 2-year term, but everything else would be appointees by the Board of Trustees. So there are, as the board is aware, there are term limits found throughout the state in various jurisdictions. Mayor, one of the things you asked me also to comment on were residency requirements with regard to the different boards. Planning and zoning, village residents, it's pretty much implied by both village law and our code. Historic preservation does not specifically state that the person has to be a village resident, but there are requirements as to who can be on that board in terms of background. I think there are 5 different types of experience. Frankly, one person can have all 5, and then you've met the requirements. Code Board of Appeals, they're all village residents. Board of Ethics, 3 village residents and 2 residents of Westchester County, at least 1 non-lawyer. Environmental Advisory are all village residents. Landlord Tenant Council, the village residents, although the landlord representatives need not be village residents. Civilian police complaint review boards. Your non-police appointees are village residents. The police appointees need not be. I didn't find any specific residency requirements as relates to Arts Committee. Recreation Advisory is fairly self-explanatory. You have village and town residents, so that would be clear, as well as Downtown Development Fund Council or Committee. So that's the residency requirements that apply there. In addition to talking about term limits, and this goes specifically to our land use boards, and explicitly by statute, planning and zoning, they have training requirements. The village law mandates that, mandates 4 hours of training a year. The training can be offered by the village, it can be offered by various agencies. In a little while, we'll go into a discussion of some amendments regarding the Environmental Advisory Committee. What I have, council, I apologize, what I have included there, it's very confusing with that. What I've gone into there is to put a similar training requirement there for those members, a 4-hour training requirement. And along lines of the training requirement, there is also the corollary of attendance requirements. And attendance requirements are viewed in different ways by other municipalities. One is that if you miss 3 consecutive meetings, you are subject to dismissal. The other is if you miss 75% of the meetings in a calendar year, you are subject to dismissal. If you do not meet the meet the training requirements, you are subject to dismissal for cause under any of those circumstances. You know, all of those, I think, are important. I think particularly with all the different land use boards that we have, be it EAC, be it planning, be it zoning, I think attendance requirements are important because we can, you know, what we don't want to have is circumstances we don't have a quorum and we can't get business done. One of the reasons you'll see when we talk about the EAC in a little bit is that the proposal is to lower the number of members from 9 to 7, so that, you know, we're working on a quorum of just 4 rather than 5, and it sometimes has been difficult otherwise to have the quorum. But, so you have term limits as one thing. As I said, you have training, and then you have obviously requirements as to attendance. Currently, the village does not have term limits for any board or commission. There are no attendance requirements for any board or commission. And although the training requirement is spelled out in the village law, it is not referenced specifically in the code. And it may be beneficial to actually have that in there. And the thought would be that around December 1st of every year, the chairperson would report, be it to the village manager or to the board of trustees, if there are any members who have not attended the meetings and in terms of the number, or have not made the training requirements. Because by December, you'll know the calendar year is just about gone, who has and has not done that. There's enough training around there that those 4 hours should be met. And in fact, as pointed out, it can be done in-house if necessary. But that training is there. So the thought, first for the board to consider is there a desire to actually have term limits? And if there are term limits, how many terms? You know, a requirement with regard to, making the number of committee meetings that are required, and the training requirement to put that in there. As I said, we do have certain residency, requirements. I think for the land use boards, it appears, more beneficial to have the village residents, certainly if you can. Certainly as to planning and zoning, probably as to EAC as well. There may be a slightly different argument as to HPC. But again, I think for all of those, and even HPC included, you would want to have a certain amount of training for those folks. And to have that in there specifically, as well as with the requirements of attendance, and if the board deems it appropriate to have term limits. And as I noted, with regard to term limits, most are for 2 consecutive terms, particularly with the land use boards, and so that could either be, generally works out to 10 years. In terms of the sit-out period, a few, as I said, mention that they have to sit out the entire full term, but most generally go maybe 1-2 years at most, with, as I said, that proviso from Tuxedo, which would give the board of trustees or the manager as the appointee to basically say, can't find anybody, there's some reason, you can be reappointed.
So what I like is I think for the boards that are 2-year terms, I think if I was thinking of term limits, like three terms, I think 6 years is a good amount of time. And I think your first 2 years, you're just kind of learning, you're just really learning what the board is about. For the 5-year terms, I think two terms. And I think for the wait out period, 2 years. And I think the exception is good from Tuxedo. So those are,
Let me just say one thing, Trustee Baseman, I appreciate that. With regard to EAC, which is currently a 2-year term, the board may well, consider legislation to increase training for these folks, to actually make it mandatory. I think if you're going to be looking at mandatory training, you may want to make it, instead of just 6 years, you may want to make it 4 terms, because they're putting a lot of time in, and they'll be doing it every year. That's, again, just a thought, but just something to think about, because I think that if you're asking and I should point out, we've always, one of the problems with the police review board is that we have people who just are unable to do the training. But specifically as to the land use, that may be something to consider. But again, I think, the number of terms you want to consider, the sit-out period, resident, the attendance requirements and training, I think is the four areas we're looking at.
And the attendance, if you miss 75% of the meetings in the calendar year,
Yeah, it actually, it was Southport, I think you were reading, and it said that there's a requirement that they attend a minimum of 75% of the
Correct,
meetings. So I think it
it's-
was,
okay.
so
it's
you
from
can't
the
miss
first-
more than 25%.
Okay.
So basically,
there's 12 meetings, you gotta show up to 9,
If
yeah.
you're meeting 12 times, you gotta be there 8 times.
Okay, I think that's reasonable.
9, right?
75%, yeah, is my math bad? Well, that's why I'm gonna
Yeah.
change.
Wow.
Only 8 and you're out of here.
Yeah. Okay. So I think
My
that's.
wife, the MBA, will be watching this tonight, as will other family members.
I think 9 and the 12 is reasonable. So.
Okay,
Yes,
so we could do
please,
it that
John.
way.
Yeah, so I think having like a boards and commissions section of the code, I think that's kind of the way to go. I think you can cover all the scenarios in there. You can put the training in there. You can put the time between, the different time between terms, if somebody comes off. And I would agree with Trustee Bazemore that the hall pass amendment here would be good, just to allow future boards and/or the village manager flexibility, in the future. So.
Stuart, could you just explain, so, the Tuxedo Park, I like the whole motivation for the Tuxedo Park allowance, particularly during this time of transition, because we have some boards that have the majority of members who certainly are beyond this whatever limit of term limits that we'd be putting on, and we don't want to lose all that institutional knowledge, and we want to have some continuity. So I'm sure that I'd be surprised if we had enough applicants that if we're talking about one of the Debbie's appointees, that you probably aren't going to have 20 people applying for 6 expired spots. And so let's say you appoint 3 or 4, of those spots. Do the others, right now, they're sitting and they're serving and they're voting and they're active members with expired terms. Is there any reason why that can't just continue, just as a general
Well,
rule?
in fact, as public officers, they continue to serve until until someone, either they're reappointed or someone is appointed in their place. So they, in other words, and in fact, one of the provisions in a lot of, you see it in most of these, is that if you have, let's say, a board member who did not attend 75% of the meetings, but voted subsequently thereto on a resolution, or didn't have the training, that does not disqualify their vote. Okay, they sit until they're removed, or they sit until their term ends. But if their term ends and and there's no one to fill that slot, or they're not reappointed, they continue to serve until someone fills that term.
So then, do we need to create a provision, or do we de facto have one, in that if somebody is currently sitting on one of these boards with an expired term, unless and until they're replaced, they're going to continue, and if they want to sit there, and unless and until somebody else is appointed to
Reappointed,
that seat, then do they need to be reappointed, or can they just continue until somebody else is appointed?
They could continue. I think it's neater if they're reappointed. Now, the thing, well, let me say this. If the benefit of simply allowing them to continue to serve is that at any point, the village manager, if it's a village manager appointee, can then appoint someone else, and basically the term then continues. So you have not reappointed a person to effectively a new 5-year term if that was not your intention. So until there's someone to take over that position, that person continues to serve. So I think the tuxedo situation is if you've made your change and you suddenly find, I don't have people to fill this slot, or what am I supposed to do? This gives you that option to basically say, I can let the person come in, or if it's a person who, or you want to waive the 2-year sit-out requirement, that allows you to do that. But at this point, on a couple of boards where members, if you want to call it termed out, their terms are over, they're continuing to serve until someone else fills that slot.
Term limits. Interesting topic. So what you just said pretty much is that, let's say if we don't have term limits, if we don't go this route, so to speak, it's up to either the village manager or the board of trustees to reappoint or not to reappoint that particular person to those boards. So it's like sort of having like term limits, because if that person serves a purpose of 10 years or 15 years, and we find someone that is also interested in being part of that particular board, if they have an application, the village manager will say, weigh in the difference and be like, this person that was not part of the board would like to be part of the board, and now reappoints that person instead of the current member that was on that board. So to me, it's like, it's up to the village manager or the board to reappoint or not to reappoint those particular people.
That's correct. But two things. The term limit also, I think, imposes a certain obligation on the board and the manager, in the sense that you want to know, when does that person's term end? Because, to be blunt, if you were to look at the list of boards and commissions that we have, and you look at when the terms expired, we have a large number of board who are serving very well, but whose terms have expired.
Correct.
And some have expired 2, 3 years ago and continue to serve. So the idea of the term limit is that, you're appointed, you get, let's say, 5 years, then you get another 5. You're correct that effectively the village manager of the board can term limit someone out just by simply saying, I'm not reappointing you. But the term limit also says to the board, they've served for, let's say, 10 years, got to look for somebody else. There's someone else out there. Open it up to somebody else.
No.
That's the other side of it.
No, and that I agree. So, talking about the different terms, because you did talk about there are some boards and commissions that we do have 3-year appointees.
Right.
So-
EAC, a 3-year would be Board of Ethics, and looks like the Rec Board.
So, I know Quintel said 2 years and 2 terms for 5 years. Sure, so that will be 10 years. And then you said 3 terms and 2 years. So there will be 2 terms and a 3-year as well?
You could do 8, 9, and 10, max.
That's what I was thinking.
You could do 3 3-year terms, and
That's-
then you're between the 8 and the 9, and you're kind of in that same ballpark.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking. I was thinking if we were doing 10 years for 2 terms, I don't want to talk about years, 2 terms and in a particular 5-year period of time, that's 10 years. So as close as we can get to the other boards, I think that would be more
I think,
appropriate than any.
under that, then, it would be
So
2
4
terms
years.
for the 5s, 3 terms for the 3s, and 4 terms for the 2s.
But-
Go ahead.
Sorry,
I mean,
in regards to training, when I was part of the HPC, the Historic Preservation Commission, we actually did a lot of that training. And maybe 1 or 2 occasions, we actually had the planning and zoning board be part of one of the trainings that we come in. So there is, and we do allocate money
Right.
for training on our budget portion. Sometimes it's very minimum, sometimes, and I have talked to a chairman of the HPC, prior to her submitting her budget, so to speak, because they do go a little bit over budget. So they do go over the budget itself, so they can be submitted to us. So there is allocation. I'm not sure if the planning board chair or the zoning board does that. I'm pretty sure that, I don't know if they do or not, but I know that the HPC does.
Right, and certainly the training requirement can be included for the HPC, just as it might be for the EAC or for planning.
They do that all the time, and like I said, that they have done it. So and this question goes to you, Debbie. Have you had a chance to meet with those boards or to the chairmen of those boards yet? Have you had a chance to talk to them?
But we are scheduling them, but I have not.
Okay, because I think, my opinion, I think it's important for you to meet this particular chairman of the boards itself, so you can actually understand the function of how they work here within our village itself. So I think that's essential. So I will ask you to do that, please.
I will.
All right, so I'm actually fine with the 8, 9, 10. Did we get consensus about the whole tuxedo part of?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I thank you, Stuart, for bringing that up. I think that's something that's helpful.
You feel the tuxedo park thing is necessary? We can't just let people continue?
I actually think it's necessary. I think it holds us accountable.
So I want to, I want to,
Are you not in favor of the tuxedo?
I don't think it's necessary. I think we're creating something that's unnecessary, and it's committing us to 5 years for somebody, when, you know, a year from now, we may have 3 people that are interested in that position. And I will also tell you, everything you just said is totally logical and absolutely makes sense and is not the reality. Because we have people who have served for 20 and 30 years, and it's just human nature that it's really hard to say to somebody, you'd really like to continue, and you're a dedicated community member, and you've been giving of your time for free for so many years. Thanks, but no thanks, we're not reappointing you. It puts, I mean, it's most often it's a manager appointment we're talking about. It puts an individual in a really tough position, and then it becomes sort of this personal rejection. And so the reality is that what we're not able to do in some instances is to have the diversity of experience, longevity in our community. We want diversity of all kinds. All we talk about is diversity in Ossining. It's everybody's #1 thing to talk about with Ossining. And if you don't have turnover in board membership, then your membership is not going to reflect the community of the time. And I will tell you, in one conversation I had with somebody, knowing that this was on for a discussion, and I said, you know, you might be somebody who would be a good planning board member. Would you be interested? And he said, well, I'm interested, but is there an opening? And I said, well, you know, there may be some, we're talking about term limits, so there may be some new appointments, so we're looking for new applicants. And his immediate reaction was, well, I don't want to push anybody out.
So you feel
That's a normal human reaction. So if there's an opening, then more people might say, oh, there's a space for me. I'd like to serve. Whereas, oh, there's a lot of people who actually are in that position, and I would be forcing them out. We're not going to get the same level of interest. And that's because people are kind. And we're all here because we care about this community.
I know that.
So the only thing is, so you feel that if we have the tuxedo part, that we would just pick people because, I mean, the whole purpose of that part is to say, if we can't find someone, hey, we can waive the requirement. If we can't, I just think that's up to the board members, or if it's a manager's appointment, to be honest about whether you can or cannot find someone.
You know, just to kind of piggyback on that, because there's been times that we have advertised for months and we get not response, like nothing, and then we have to reappoint people that are on the board that are still interested to being part of that. But lately, I think we've been seeing a different wave of people, of community members being interested in being part of some of the boards. So I think that's, to me, is essential, because I was on that board many years ago. So I know exactly that feeling, you know, that feeling that that's exactly what you just said. You know, I don't want to push anybody out. You know, I get that. You know, but I think for us, given that option, the tuxedo word, I don't want to say the loophole, so to speak, give us that opportunity within 5 years from now, maybe we go back to no one really wants to be part of any of those boards. You know, no one's really applying. So we have that option to reappoint those people that are still interested in being there. That, you know, that to me does.
Because doesn't it require that we pass a resolution? Like, if we're gonna waive something?
Yes.
Yeah, so to me, that's the thing. Like, if we're saying, okay, you know what, we couldn't find anyone,
So for this particular spot,
right?
we will
We
waive
have
the
to-
requirement
yes.
and allow the manager to make an appointment? Are we talking about manager appointments or
I
board
think
appointments?
we're talking about
The
both.
waive, the waive was for both.
But that okay. So now we have to have a resolution to say that we're waiving this requirement. That says to the public, oh, they couldn't find anyone. Now, if we get back and it's like, well, I applied for this and I applied for this, and how come they didn't choose me? Then you have to answer to that. But I think this gives you an opportunity to, in the case, like, we just have to be honest about it. We couldn't find someone, so this person wants to do it. But we still have term limits.
Okay, so let me just say, this is written as if it's reads to me like this is just board appointments that they're talking about.
Well, but.
Because that
are
may
you
be
looking
the
at
circumstance in Tuxedo Park, yes.
Of course, but in Tuxedo, yeah, that's right, but in Tuxedo, the board appoints the planning board members, the ZBA
Right.
members, and which in fact is what the statute provides, unless in fact there's a resolution to the contrary, which is, or an ordinance to the contrary, which is what this village has done.
But if we're going to put in this Tuxedo Park thing about waiving the term limits, then I'd like us to be then I would like the board to be weighing in whether it's a board appointment or a manager appointment.
I think, well, yeah, I understand what you're saying, is that in that circumstance, then if it's determined that we need, that you have to waive it, then the board would have to actually, a resolution would have to be approved,
Right.
permitting the manager essentially to,
Exactly.
Right, essentially, Debbie
override- to
Debbie comes to us
override
and
it.
says, I'd like to reappoint this person, even though they've served for X number of years. So then we're essentially approving her reappointment of somebody who's already served too long. I'm just,
Because we're extending it beyond the term limit.
right, or the other
no one was
provision that they
interested
do.
in
Because no one
being
was
part of that board. Yeah.
Now, I will also say, there is, as far as the, yeah, so fine, I can support it, it's not what I want, but I'm the only one. So with that provision that there's a hurdle, that it's not just a de facto, like this is what we're gonna do next. But as far as the fact that we have a lot more interest right now than we have, that is partly, I think, because of just where we are nationally right now, where we are in this community right now. Some of us, we're just getting better at reaching out to people. We're just making a much more deliberate, personal, concerted effort. So, I think we're finally learning how to do this, even as we're increasing the number of positions for people to apply for. So, all right, Stuart, do you feel like you have your
Yes, I do.
your marching orders here?
yes, I do. March.
Final episode.
Okay.
I thought it was gonna get worse.
Okay, what I have here, folks, I'll pass this around. This is proposed changes with regard to the Environmental Advisory Council, Chapter 119. Based upon the discussions we just had, well, a couple of things. First, the number of members would be reduced from 9 to 7 members. And I would also take out the word regular. I'm not sure what a regular as compared to an irregular member is of a particular board. So we'll remove that. But with regard to terms, based upon the discussion we just had, it would be 4 consecutive terms, not the 3 that's in here. And this also has that the person would, if they wanted to come back, they'd have to sit out for 2 years.
Wait, sorry, that's no. We didn't talk about that on the
Oh, the
previous
sit out?
topic.
Very much,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
So what did, okay, I apologize.
But I'm sorry. I will be okay talking about as a overall.
Right.
And the whole, I think a year, if anything. That's just me. I
I
don't know
think
what.
I'm for 2, actually, 2 years.
I don't feel strongly either way, because I think once the person's not reappointed, they're reapplying anyway, and there's no expectation that they would be guaranteed the seat, so I don't
But
feel strongly that
they can also apply for another board,
At any
another
time.
Right.
commission. So,
Correct.
Yes, and
so
and
to
we
me,
would,
to
we
me,
would-
a
yeah.
year would be.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we would love to see that. That somebody who has training and expertise in one board has served their 8, 9, or 10 years and says, now I want to go and serve in another capacity. That would be really beneficial. And they don't need to wait one day.
Correct.
We're gonna
Correct.
change
At that
this to
point, yes.
4 consecutive terms, though, right?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
Do you feel strongly about 1 year off or versus 2 years off before a potential
1 year is
reappointment to the
fine.
same?
Okay, we can do
1 year is fine with me. I don't think that needs.
Okay, that can be changed.
Oh, you can't win them all,
Listen,
Quantel.
again, if we want to talk about things I'm winning at, I got a
I mean,
list.
the person has, listen, at the end of the day, the person.
You got a big one today.
The other thing is, if the person gets a year between, they still have to be reappointed. There's still they don't just get the, they just
They have to
don't get
reapply and
the
interview
seat.
and, yeah.
Yeah, they have to reapply, re-interview, the whole thing. So it's not as if, 1 or 2 years would make a difference.
One of the things that I have I'm proposing in here to delete is the section involving two members between the ages, that could be between the ages of 16 and 21. That was our sort of school appointment. I did have an off-the-record conversation with Jeff Smith, who is here tonight, who's the EAC chair. One of the things that was suggested is that perhaps we can continue the outreach to the schools, but those individuals could be either interns, they could be non-voting members, to provide a lot of the back work that we have under the powers and duties for the particular commission, which can involve a lot of other work. So I think, you know, that kind of language can certainly be put in there to allow, you know, that outreach to the schools with regard.
Do we have a general age requirement for serving on commissions in general?
I think it's assumed that they'd be 18.
Okay, but if someone actually, like, what is?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No, that's an interesting
Yeah.
point.
No, I know. I was thinking that too when you said it.
Define that. So,
Or maybe we don't. I don't know.
no, yeah.
You know, the town EAC, which is a committee, not a council, they have
Yeah, they do. When I was
engaged
on
members,
it,
and I'd be interested to know what their provision is that accounts for that. If it's a formal appointment, I think it would be nice if we appointed somebody, they might take it more seriously for however long they served. We certainly don't want them contributing to the amount of people we have to have for a quorum, which is what we have right now. Yes, Jeff, please join us at the microphone. And this is as the aforementioned Jeff Smith, chair of the EAC.
Thank you. The village EAC has done some joint meetings with the town EAC, and I believe their student is appointed because it's the same person every time we met with them. Now, we haven't done that in a few years, but normally in connection with the village fair, where we have a joint booth, we do meet with them beforehand. We have been so on demand for so long now, and I'm undermanned, not on demand.
I got it.
We've been so undermanned for so long now. I just was looking through this and saw I'm supposed to give you a report a few days ago, and number one, I'd forgotten that, but number two, there was nothing to report. We've had no meetings in a year because there weren't enough of us to have a meeting. And although now we're up to 6, we had a meeting 10 days ago or whatever, and we couldn't get a quorum. Somebody was out, somebody was sick. And as you know, one of the members was fuming mad because I had begged him to come, and he canceled some family vacation and got there, and there was still no quorum.
Yes.
So it's important. I fully support the training requirements. I think that's terrific on all the boards. I think that you got a little tangled up from my point of view, if you want my opinion. If you don't, I'll sit down. But on this idea of the tuxedo part thing, members whose term has expired but there isn't a replacement stay on. What the tuxedo park thing does is allow you to appoint that person to a new term so you don't have to keep looking. That's really all it does. It allows you to appoint that after you've looked for a year and you can't find anybody, you appoint them to a new term and go do something else. So they work together, those two provisions. And I agree with everything you said about motivating people. I've chaired several boards, both with and without term limits. Some of them have people that have been there almost longer than me, and they just don't show up. I love the idea of requirements and getting rid of people who don't meet them. I think this is a great idea. I think that there's a lot of thought that's gone into it, and I'm very impressed with that. Thank you.
Thank you. The only thing I'd like to add is a way to, and I don't know if it needs to be stated in here, or we could just choose to appoint, you know, a high school or college student to be a member, a non-voting member of the EAC, and to participate in any other capacity, but not. I don't know if that needs to be. Does that need to be legislated, or we can just choose to do it?
because the board, you could just essentially, I think, say to the EAC, if you want to go out and have a high school student come and assist you, fine.
Right, but I think the
don't think you
point.
need it within your code.
That's fine, but we could still, whether it's in the code or not, we could choose to pass a resolution saying that the board is appointing Jan Smith
As
to,
student intern to the
as,
EAC.
yes, as the,
Absolutely.
okay,
But one of the things
whether it's in the code or
I
not.
was saying earlier is if we don't even actually have a age requirement, I mean, ideally when we're advertising boards and commissions, high school students are not applying, but seeing that we don't even have an age requirement, it's really,
No, but the difference is to be, actually, to solicit Ossining High School, which has a wonderful science program, to say we'd like to have an opportunity for one of your students to work with our
Yeah.
EAC. We've got some project we could really benefit from them helping us. And the reality is when we've had people who've applied to be members, they don't stay very long
Yeah.
because even if the board had a lot going on, they move on because they grow up.
yeah, I understand.
They go to college. Things
Yeah,
like that.
they get busy.
Little details.
Okay, so, thank you, Mr. Smith, for your, insights and, support. I guess, my only question then, Stuart, did we finish going through the EAC?
Yeah, as I said, we have we have the whole training requirement, but that's fairly consistent with what else exists, and it's pretty much matches what the state requires for zoning and planning. So it's just to extend it to EAC.
Then, and I'll defer to you when it comes to how best to fit this into the code so that
Right.
it's most easily accessed. So you're talking about creating a new section of the code, boards, commissions, councils, and committees, that references many of the big picture things we're talking about with term limits and length of terms and the tuxedo
yeah,
mark thing?
There's one of two, that's either one way I'm thinking. The other is simply, we already have chapters for each of the different boards. And we could simply add, and most of them have a section called membership. And under that membership can now say, this is the term limit is X, and you have to be out for a year if you want to reapply. And if there are training requirements for the various boards, those boards that have it, put it in there. That way they can see it directly. My thought with the boards and commissions, and I initially liked it, I'm not as sure right now, only because you're still going to have to be flipping back and forth to the different chapters to find out which the different
Yeah.
commissions are. But again, some do it as a general section called boards and commissions, just saying these are the term limits for these are the different boards.
Thing is, nobody flips through a book except for you. Everybody else searches online. So the flipping's not really the challenge for most of us. They gave me a book when I started as a trustee. That was not time well spent. 'Cause
Just
it's
Stuart,
just-
I
but-
like
but-
books to highlight stuff.
Whatever.
I mean, perhaps these things could be reflected in two sections.
Correct.
Yeah, but
It could be redundant,
That's
well, the question is, though, we have the Ossining Arts Project, which we appoint everyone. We have expectations, but I don't believe that's a code. We have the Downtown Development Fund,
Neither in the code.
which is not in the code because that was part of the LADA with
Right.
with
Well, that would be the
Ginsburg.
reason to have.
So,
the
yeah, so having the boards
commissions.
and commissions section would then refer to any board or commission that is in the code, or these are the general rules that would be followed by any other
That's fair.
committee that may
And then
at
it-
some point
and
be
then it can
established.
cross-reference back to the other chapters
Yeah.
where it's.
And so then
that's fine.
each of the chapters in the, but we are gonna have to update every existing code and say, for membership,
C section.
refer back to the boards and committees section, and then there might also be some other stuff
Well,
about
also-
particular qualifications.
Also for example, EAC, be it planning, the training requirement
Yes.
will be spelled out, and so it can be there. So it'll be a more comprehensive, local law to have all that in there.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, please come to the microphone, Jeff.
Please.
Thank you. And Jeff, you are also yourself an attorney, aren't you?
I am, and so I understand why lawyers are inherently very lazy, so they always look for a model to follow.
Except for
Except for
Stuart.
Stuart. He's not. He doesn't follow that category, I guess.
But the thought I had is the problems that the EAC has had with meeting its quorum over the last couple of years, and until Stuart pointed it out to Lynn, we just went merrily along with 2 people and 3 people and did things. And it wasn't because you didn't appoint new members, it's because members resigned. So then there should be some thought given to a provision that fills those resignation things in any board, so that you don't fall below the quorum level, which is what happened to the EAC.
Yes.
I don't
Stuart-
know the solution
Yeah, no,
to
Stuart
that.
has a much stricter
And being a lazy
interpretation of
lawyer, I would
the
see what
quorums
other
than we had
people
in
have
the
done.
Yes, thank you.
And if there's a resignation, I mean, it is notified, then, the process of obviously looking for the person can start immediately.
Right, and we've been getting better at
That we can certainly take care of.
that. Mr. Basil, were you about to say? All right.
Weird.
Madam Manager, did you have anything further?
I do not, thank you.
Okay, I have one tiny personnel thing, and do we have any real estate tonight?
I have an advice of counsel briefly.
Okay, so then can I ask for a motion to adjourn into executive session for discussion of personnel regarding specific persons?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And with that, I say thank you very much for joining us for this stimulating work session. And thank you to my colleagues. I think we actually got a lot of things figured out. I look forward to seeing folks next week at the courthouse on Spring Street. This evening is adjourned to executive session.